The Count of Monte Cristo. Madame de Villefort, however, reassured by the silence, which was alone disturbed by the regular breathing of Valentine, again extended her hand, and half hidden by the curtains succeeded in emptying the contents of the phial into the glass. Then she retired so gently that Valentine did not know she had left the room. She only witnessed the withdrawal of the arm, the fair round arm of a woman but 25 years old, and who yet spread death around her. It is impossible to describe the sensations experienced by Valentine during the minute and a half Madame de Villefort remained in the room. The grating against the library door aroused the young girl from the stupor in which she was plunged, and which almost amounted to insensibility. She raised her head with an effort. The noiseless door again turned on its hinges, and the Count of Monte Cristo reappeared. "Well," said he, "do you still doubt?" "Oh," murmured the young girl, "have you seen?" "Alas!" "Did you recognize?" Valentine groaned. "Oh yes," she said, "I saw, but I cannot believe." "Would you rather die, then, and cause Maximilian's death?" "Oh," repeated the young girl, almost bewildered, "can I not leave the house? Can I not escape?" "Valentine, the hand which now threatens you will pursue you everywhere. Your servants will be seduced with gold, and death will be offered to you disguised in every shape. You will find it in the water you drink from the spring, in the fruit you pluck from the tree." "But did you not say that my kind grandfather's precaution had neutralized the poison?" "Yes, but not against a strong dose. The poison will be changed and the quantity increased." He took the glass and raised it to his lips. "It is already done," he said. "Brucine is no longer employed, but a simple narcotic. I can recognize the flavor of the alcohol in which it has been dissolved. If you had taken what Madame de Villefort has poured into your glass, Valentine, you would have been doomed." "But," exclaimed the young girl, "why am I thus pursued? Why? Are you so kind, so good, so unsuspicious of ill, that you cannot understand Valentine?" "No, I have never injured her." "But you are rich, Valentine. You have 200,000 livres a year, and you prevent her son from enjoying these 200,000 livres. How so? The fortune is not her gift, but is inherited from my relations." "Certainly, and that is why Mem and Madame de Saint-Méran have died. That is why Monsieur Noirtier was sentenced the day he made you his heir. That is why you, in your turn, are to die. It is because your father would inherit your property, and your brother, his only son, succeed to his." "Edward, poor child, are all these crimes committed on his account?" "Ah, then you at length understand? Heaven grant that this may not be visited upon him. Valentine, you are an angel, but why is my grandfather allowed to live? It was considered that you dead, the fortune would naturally revert to your brother unless he were disinherited, and besides, the crime appearing useless, it would be folly to commit it. And is it possible that this frightful combination of crimes has been invented by a woman? Do you recollect in the arbor of the Hôtel des Postes at Perugia, seeing a man in a brown cloak, whom your stepmother was questioning upon Aqua Tofana? Well, ever since then, the infernal project has been ripening in her brain." "Ah, then indeed, sir," said the sweet girl, bathed in tears, "I see that I am condemned to die." "No, Valentine, for I have foreseen all their plots. No, your enemy is conquered since we know her, and you will live, Valentine. Live to be happy yourself, and to confer happiness upon a noble heart. But to ensure this, you must rely on me." "Command me, sir. What am I to do? You must blindly take what I give you. Alas, were it only for my own sake, I should prefer to die." "You must not confide in anyone, not even in your father." "My father is not engaged in this fearful plot, is he, sir?" asked Valentine, clasping her hands. "No, and yet your father, a man accustomed to judicial accusations, ought to have known that all these deaths have not happened naturally. It is he who should have watched over you. He should have occupied my place. He should have emptied that glass. He should have risen against the assassin. Spectre against spectre," he murmured in a low voice as he concluded his sentence. "Sir," said Valentine, "I will do all I can to live, for there are two beings who love me and will die if I die, my grandfather and Maximilian. I will watch over them as I have over you. Well, sir, do as you will with me." And then she added in a low voice, "Oh heavens, what will befall me?" "Whatever may happen, Valentine, do not be alarmed. Though you suffer, though you lose sight, hearing, consciousness, fear nothing. Though you should awake and be ignorant where you are, still do not fear, even though you should find yourself in a sepulchral vault or coffin. Reassure yourself then and say to yourself, at this moment a friend, a father, who lives for my happiness and that of Maximilian, watches over me. Alas, alas, what a fearful extremity! Valentine, would you rather denounce your stepmother? I would rather die 100 times. Oh yes, die! No, you will not die, but will you promise me, whatever happens, that you will not complain but hope? I will think of Maximilian. You are my own darling child, Valentine. I alone can save you, and I will. Valentine, in the extremity of her terror, joined her hands, for she felt that the moment had arrived to ask for courage, and began to pray, and while uttering little more than incoherent words, she forgot that her white shoulders had no other covering than her long hair, and that the pulsations of her heart could be seen through the lace of her nightdress. Monte Cristo gently laid his hand on the young girl's arm, drew the velvet coverlet close to her throat, and said with a paternal smile, "My child, believe in my devotion to you as you believe in the goodness of Providence and the love of Maximilian." Valentine gave him a look full of gratitude, and remained as docile as a child. Then he drew from his waistcoat pocket the little emerald box, raised the golden lid, and took from it a pastille about the size of a pea, which he placed in her hand. She took it and looked attentively on the Count. There was an expression on the face of her intrepid protector which commanded her veneration. She evidently interrogated him by her look. "Yes," said he. Valentine carried the pastille to her mouth and swallowed it. "And now, my dear child, adieu for the present. I will try and gain a little sleep, for you are saved." "Go," said Valentine. "Whatever happens, I promise you not to fear." Monte Cristo for some time kept his eyes fixed on the young girl, who gradually fell asleep, yielding to the effects of the narcotic the Count had given her. Then he took the glass, emptied 3 parts of the contents in the fireplace, that it might be supposed Valentine had taken it, and replaced it on the table. Then he disappeared, after throwing a farewell glance on Valentine, who slept with the confidence and innocence of an angel at the feet of the Lord. Chapter 102. Valentine. The nightlight continued to burn on the chimney-piece, exhausting the last drops of oil which floated on the surface of the water. The globe of the lamp appeared of a reddish hue, and the flame, brightening before it expired, threw out the last flickerings, which in an inanimate object have been so often compared with the convulsions of a human creature in its final agonies. A dull and dismal light was shed over the bedclothes and curtains surrounding the young girl. All noise in the streets had ceased, and the silence was frightful. It was then that the door of Edward's room opened, and a head we have before noticed appeared in the glass opposite. It was Madame de Villefort, who came to witness the effects of the drink she had prepared. She stopped in the doorway, listened for a moment to the flickering of the lamp, the only sound in that deserted room, and then advanced to the table to see if Valentine's glass were empty. It was still about a quarter full, as we before stated. Madame de Villefort emptied the contents into the ashes, which she disturbed that they might the more readily absorb the liquid. Then she carefully rinsed the glass, and wiping it with her handkerchief, replaced it on the table. If anyone could have looked into the room just then, he would have noticed the hesitation with which Madame de Villefort approached the bed and looked fixedly on Valentine. The dim light, the profound silence, and the gloomy thoughts inspired by the hour, and still more by her own conscience, all combined to produce a sensation of fear. The poisoner was terrified at the contemplation of her own work. At length she rallied, drew aside the curtain, and leaning over the pillow, gazed intently on Valentine. The young girl no longer breathed. No breath issued through the half-closed teeth. The white lips no longer quivered. The eyes were suffused with a bluish vapor, and the long black lashes rested on a cheek white as wax. Madame de Villefort gazed upon the face so expressive even in its stillness. Then she ventured to raise the coverlet and press her hand upon the young girl's heart. It was cold and motionless. She only felt the pulsation in her own fingers, and withdrew her hand with a shudder. One arm was hanging out of the bed. From shoulder to elbow, it was molded after the arms of Germaine Pilon's Graces, but the forearm seemed to be slightly distorted by convulsion, and the hand, so delicately formed, was resting with stiff outstretched fingers on the framework of the bed. The nails, too, were turning blue. Madame de Villefort had no longer any doubt. All was over. She had consummated the last terrible work she had to accomplish. There was no more to do in the room, so the poisoner retired stealthily, as though fearing to hear the sound of her own footsteps. But as she withdrew, she still held aside the curtain, absorbed in the irresistible attraction always exerted by the picture of death, so long as it is merely mysterious and does not excite disgust. The minutes passed. Madame de Villefort could not drop the curtain which she held like a funeral pall over the head of Valentine. She was lost in reverie, and the reverie of crime is remorse. Just then the lamp again flickered. The noise startled Madame de Villefort, who shuddered and dropped the curtain. Immediately afterwards the light expired, and the room was plunged in frightful obscurity, while the clock at that minute struck 4:30. Overpowered with agitation, the poisoner succeeded in groping her way to the door, and reached her room in an agony of fear. The darkness lasted 2 hours longer. Then, by degrees, a cold light crept through the Venetian blinds, until at length it revealed the objects in the room. About this time the nurse's cough was heard on the stairs, and the woman entered the room with a cup in her hand. To the tender eye of a father or a lover, the first glance would have sufficed to reveal Valentine's condition, but to this hireling Valentine only appeared to sleep. "Good," she exclaimed, approaching the table. "She has taken part of her draught. The glass is 3/4 empty." Then she went to the fireplace and lit the fire, and although she had just left her bed, she could not resist the temptation offered by Valentine's sleep, so she threw herself into an armchair to snatch a little more rest. The clock striking 8 awoke her. Astonished at the prolonged slumber of the patient, and frightened to see that the arm was still hanging out of the bed, she advanced towards Valentine, and for the first time noticed the white lips. She tried to replace the arm, but it moved with a frightful rigidity which could not deceive a sick nurse. She screamed aloud, then running to the door exclaimed, "Help! Help!" "What is the matter?" asked M. d'Avrigny at the foot of the stairs, it being the hour he usually visited her. "What is it?" asked Villefort, rushing from his room. "Doctor, do you hear them call for help?" "Yes, yes. Let us hasten up. It was in Valentine's room." But before the doctor and the father could reach the room, the servants who were on the same floor had entered, and seeing Valentine pale and motionless on her bed, they lifted up their hands towards heaven and stood transfixed, as though struck by lightning. "Call Madame de Villefort! Wake Madame de Villefort!" cried the procureur from the door of his chamber, which apparently he scarcely dared to leave. But instead of obeying him, the servant stood watching Mmes d'Avrigny, who ran to Valentine, and raised her in his arms. "What? This one too?" he exclaimed. "Oh, where will be the end?" Villefort rushed into the room. "What are you saying, doctor?" he exclaimed, raising his hands to heaven. "I say that Valentine is dead," replied d'Avrigny in a voice terrible in its solemn calmness. De Villefort staggered and buried his head in the bed. On the exclamation of the doctor and the cry of the father, the servants all fled with muttered imprecations. They were heard running down the stairs and through the long passages. Then there was a rush in the court. Afterwards all was still. They had, one and all, deserted the accursed house. Just then, Madame de Villefort, in the act of slipping on her dressing gown, threw aside the drapery, and for a moment stood motionless, as though interrogating the occupants of the room, while she endeavored to call up some rebellious tears. On a sudden she stepped, or rather bounded, with outstretched arms towards the table. She saw d'Avrigny curiously examining the glass, which she felt certain of having emptied during the night. It was now a third full, just as it was when she threw the contents into the ashes. The spectre of Valentine rising before the poisoner would have alarmed her less. It was indeed the same color as the draught she had poured into the glass, and which Valentine had drunk. It was indeed the poison which could not deceive M. d'Avrigny, which he now examined so closely. It was doubtless a miracle from heaven that, notwithstanding her precautions, there should be some trace, some proof remaining to reveal the crime. While Madame de Villefort remained rooted to the spot like a statue of terror, and Villefort, with his head hidden in the bedclothes, saw nothing around him, d'Avrigny approached the window, that he might the better examine the contents of the glass, and dipping the tip of his finger in, tasted it. "Ah!" he exclaimed, "it is no longer brucine that is used. Let me see what it is." Then he ran to one of the cupboards in Valentine's room, which had been transformed into a medicine closet, and taking from its silver case a small bottle of nitric acid, dropped a little of it into the liquor, which immediately changed to a blood-red color. "Ah!" exclaimed d'Avrigny, in a voice in which the horror of a judge unveiling the truth was mingled with the delight of a student making a discovery. Madame de Villefort was overpowered. Her eyes first flashed and then swam. She staggered towards the door and disappeared. Directly afterwards, the distant sound of a heavy weight falling on the ground was heard, but no one paid any attention to it. The nurse was engaged in watching the chemical analysis, and Villefort was still absorbed in grief. M. d'Avrigny alone had followed Madame de Villefort with his eyes and watched her hurried retreat. He lifted up the drapery over the entrance to Edward's room, and his eye reaching as far as Madame de Villefort's apartment, he beheld her extended lifeless on the floor. "Go to the assistance of Madame de Villefort," he said to the nurse. "Madame de Villefort is ill." "But Mademoiselle de Villefort," stammered the nurse. "Mademoiselle de Villefort no longer requires help," said d'Avrigny, "since she is dead." "Dead, dead," groaned forth Villefort in a paroxysm of grief, which was the more terrible from the novelty of the sensation in the iron heart of that man. "Dead," repeated a third voice. "Who said Valentine was dead?" The two men turned round and saw Morrel standing at the door, pale and terror-stricken. This is what had happened. At the usual time, Morrel had presented himself at the little door leading to Noirtier's room. Contrary to custom, the door was open, and having no occasion to ring, he entered. He waited for a moment in the hall and called for a servant to conduct him to M. Noirtier. But no one answered, the servants having, as we know, deserted the house. Morrel had no particular reason for uneasiness. Monte Cristo had promised him that Valentine should live, and so far he had always fulfilled his word. Every night the Count had given him news, which was the next morning confirmed by Noirtier. Still this extraordinary silence appeared strange to him, and he called a second and third time, still no answer. Then he determined to go up. Noirtier's room was opened, like all the rest. The first thing he saw was the old man sitting in his armchair in his usual place, but his eyes expressed alarm, which was confirmed by the pallor which overspread his features. "How are you, sir?" asked Morrel, with a sickness of heart. "Well," answered the old man, by closing his eyes, but his appearance manifested increasing uneasiness. "You are thoughtful, sir," continued Morrel. "You want something. Shall I call one of the servants?" "Yes," replied Noirtier. Morrel pulled the bell, but though he nearly broke the cord, no one answered. He turned towards Noirtier. The pallor and anguish expressed on his countenance momentarily increased. "Oh," exclaimed Morrel, "why do they not come? Is anyone ill in the house?" The eyes of Noirtier seemed as though they would start from their sockets. "What is the matter? You alarm me? Valentine? Valentine?" "Yes, yes," signed Noirtier. Maximilian tried to speak, but he could articulate nothing. He staggered and supported himself against the wainscot. Then he pointed to the door. "Yes, yes, yes," continued the old man. Maximilian rushed up the little staircase, while Noirtier's eyes seemed to say, "Quicker, quicker!" In a minute the young man darted through several rooms, till at length he reached Valentine's. There was no occasion to push the door. It was wide open. A sob was the only sound he heard. He saw, as though in a mist, a black figure kneeling and buried in a confused mass of white drapery. A terrible fear transfixed him. It was then he heard a voice exclaim, "Valentine is dead!" and another voice which like an echo repeated, "Dead! Dead!" Chapter 103. Maximilian Villefort rose, half ashamed of being surprised in such a paroxysm of grief. The terrible office he had held for 25 years had succeeded in making him more or less than man. His glance, at first wandering, fixed itself upon Morrel. "Who are you, sir," he asked, "that forget that this is not the manner to enter a house stricken with death? Go, sir, go." But Morrel remained motionless. He could not detach his eyes from that disordered bed and the pale corpse of the young girl who was lying on it. "Go, do you hear?" said Villefort, while d'Avrigny advanced to lead Morel out. Maximilian stared for a moment at the corpse, gazed all around the room, then upon the two men. He opened his mouth to speak, but finding it impossible to give utterance to the innumerable ideas that occupied his brain, he went out, thrusting his hands through his hair in such a manner that Villefort and d'Avrigny, for a moment diverted from the engrossing topic, exchanged glances, which seemed to say, "He is mad!" But in less than 5 minutes the staircase groaned beneath an extraordinary weight. Morel was seen carrying with superhuman strength the armchair containing Noirtier upstairs. When he reached the landing, he placed the armchair on the floor and rapidly rolled it into Valentine's room. This could only have been accomplished by means of unnatural strength supplied by powerful excitement. But the most fearful spectacle was Noirtier being pushed towards the bed, his face expressing all his meaning, and his eyes supplying the want of every other faculty. That pale face and flaming glance appeared to Villefort like a frightful apparition. Each time he had been brought into contact with his father, something terrible had happened. "See what they have done!" cried Morel, with one hand leaning on the back of the chair and the other extended towards Valentine. "See, my father, see!" Villefort drew back and looked with astonishment on the young man, who, almost a stranger to him, called Noirtier his father. At this moment the whole soul of the old man seemed centered in his eyes, which became bloodshot, the veins of the throat swelled, his cheeks and temples became purple, as though he was struck with epilepsy. Nothing was wanting to complete this but the utterance of a cry, and the cry issued from his pores, if we may thus speak, a cry frightful in its silence. d'Avrigny rushed towards the old man and made him inhale a powerful restorative. "Sir," cried Morel, seizing the moist hand of the paralytic, "they ask me who I am, and what right I have to be here. Oh, you know it! Tell them! Tell them!" And the young man's voice was choked by sobs. As for the old man, his chest heaved with his panting respiration. One could have thought that he was undergoing the agonies preceding death. At length, happier than the young man, who sobbed without weeping, tears glistened in the eyes of Noirtier. "Tell them," said Morel in a hoarse voice, "tell them that I am her betrothed. Tell them she was my beloved, my noble girl, my only blessing in the world. Tell them, oh, tell them, that corpse belongs to me." The young man, overwhelmed by the weight of his anguish, fell heavily on his knees before the bed, which his fingers grasped with convulsive energy. d'Avrigny, unable to bear the sight of this touching emotion, turned away, and Villefort, without seeking any further explanation, and attracted towards him by the irresistible magnetism which draws us towards those who have loved the people for whom we mourn, extended his hand towards the young man. But Morel saw nothing. He had grasped the hand of Valentine, and unable to weep, vented his agony in groans as he bit the sheets. For some time nothing was heard in that chamber but sobs, exclamations, and prayers. At length Villefort, the most composed of all, spoke. "Sir," said he to Maximilian, "you say you loved Valentine, that you were betrothed to her. I knew nothing of this engagement, of this love, yet I, her father, forgive you, for I see that your grief is real and deep, and besides my own sorrow is too great for anger to find a place in my heart. But you see that the angel whom you hoped for has left this earth. She has nothing more to do with the adoration of men. Take a last farewell, sir, of her sad remains. Take the hand you expected to possess once more within your own, and then separate yourself from her forever. Valentine now requires only the ministrations of the priest." "You are mistaken, sir," exclaimed Morel, raising himself on one knee, his heart pierced by a more acute pang than any he had yet felt. "You are mistaken. Valentine, dying as she has, not only requires a priest, but an avenger. You, M. de Villefort, send for the priest. I will be the avenger." "What do you mean, sir?" asked Villefort, trembling at the new idea inspired by the delirium of Morel. "I tell you, sir, that two persons exist in you. The father has mourned sufficiently. Now let the procureur fulfill his office." The eyes of Noirtier glistened, and d'Avrigny approached. "Gentlemen," said Morel, reading all that passed through the minds of the witnesses to the scene, "I know what I am saying, and you know as well as I do what I am about to say. Valentine has been assassinated." Villefort hung his head, d'Avrigny approached nearer, and Noirtier said, "Yes," with his eyes. "Now, sir," continued Morel. In these days no one can disappear by violent means without some inquiries being made as to the cause of her disappearance, even were she not a young, beautiful, and adorable creature like Valentine. Now, le procureur du roi, said Morel with increasing vehemence, no mercy is allowed. I denounce the crime. It is your place to seek the assassin. The young man's implacable eyes interrogated Villefort, who on his side glanced from Noirtier to d'Avrigny, but instead of finding sympathy in the eyes of the doctor and his father, he only saw an expression as inflexible as that of Maximilian. Yes, indicated the old man. Assuredly, said d'Avrigny. Sir, said Villefort, striving to struggle against this triple force and his own emotion, sir, you are deceived. No one commits crimes here. I am stricken by fate. It is horrible indeed, but no one assassinates. The eyes of Noirtier lighted up with rage, and d'Avrigny prepared to speak. Morel, however, extended his arm and commanded silence. And I say that murders are committed here, said Morel, whose voice, though lower in tone, lost none of its terrible distinctness. I tell you that this is the fourth victim within the last 4 months. I tell you Valentine's life was attempted by poison 4 days ago, though she escaped, owing to the precautions of Noirtier. I tell you that the dose has been double, the poison changed, and that this time it has succeeded. I tell you that you know these things as well as I do, since this gentleman has forewarned you, both as a doctor and as a friend. Oh, you rave, sir, exclaimed Villefort, in vain endeavoring to escape the net in which he was taken. I rave, said Morel. Well then, I appeal to d'Avrigny himself. Ask him, sir, if he recollects the words he uttered in the garden of this house on the night of Madame de Saint-Méran's death. You thought yourselves alone, and talked about that tragical death, and the fatality you mentioned then is the same which has caused the murder of Valentine. Villefort and d'Avrigny exchanged looks. Yes, yes, continued Morel. Recall the scene, for the words you thought were only given to silence and solitude fell into my ears. Certainly, after witnessing the culpable indolence manifested by M. de Villefort towards his own relations, I ought to have denounced him to the authorities. Then I should not have been an accomplice to thy death, as I now am, sweet, beloved Valentine. But the accomplice shall become the avenger. This fourth murder is apparent to all, and if thy father abandon thee, Valentine, it is I, and I swear it, that shall pursue the assassin. And this time, as though nature had at least taken compassion on the vigorous frame, nearly bursting with its own strength, the words of Morel were stifled in his throat. His breast heaved, the tears, so long rebellious, gushed from his eyes, and he threw himself weeping on his knees by the side of the bed. Then d'Avrigny spoke. And I too, he exclaimed in a low voice. I unite with M. Morel in demanding justice for crime. My blood boils at the idea of having encouraged a murderer by my cowardly concession. Oh, merciful heavens, murmured Villefort. Morel raised his head, and reading the eyes of the old man, which gleamed with unnatural luster. Stay, he said, and Noirtier wishes to speak. Yes, indicated Noirtier with an expression the more terrible from all his faculties being centered in his glance. Do you know the assassin? Asked Morel. Yes, replied Noirtier. And will you direct us? Exclaimed the young man. Listen, d'Avrigny, listen. Noirtier looked upon Morel with one of those melancholy smiles which had so often made Valentine happy, and thus fixed his attention. Then, having riveted the eyes of his interlocutor on his own, he glanced towards the door. Do you wish me to leave? Said Morel sadly. Yes, replied Noirtier. Alas, alas, sir, have pity on me. The old man's eyes remained fixed on the door. May I at least return? Asked Morel. Yes. Must I leave alone? No. Whom am I to take with me? The procureur? No. The doctor? Yes. You wish to remain alone with Mlle. de Villefort? Yes. But can he understand you? Yes. Oh, said Villefort, inexpressibly delighted to think that the inquiries were to be made by him alone. Oh, be satisfied, I can understand my father. While uttering these words with this expression of joy, his teeth clashed together violently. d'Avrigny took the young man's arm and led him out of the room. A more than death-like silence then reigned in the house. At the end of a quarter of an hour, a faltering footstep was heard, and Villefort appeared at the door of the apartment where d'Avrigny and Morel had been staying, one absorbed in meditation, the other in grief. You can come, he said, and led them back to Noirtier. Morel looked attentively on Villefort. His face was livid, large drops rolled down his face, and in his fingers he held the fragments of a quill pen which he had torn to atoms. "Gentlemen," he said in a hoarse voice, "give me your word of honor that this horrible secret shall forever remain buried amongst ourselves." The two men drew back. "I entreat you," continued Villefort. "But," said Morrel, "the culprit, the murderer, the assassin." "Do not alarm yourself, sir. Justice will be done," said Villefort. "My father has revealed the culprit's name. My father thirsts for revenge as much as you do, yet even he conjures you as I do to keep this secret. Do you not, father?" "Yes," resolutely replied Noirtier. Morrel suffered an exclamation of horror and surprise to escape him. "Oh, sir," said Villefort, arresting Maximilian by the arm, "if my father, the inflexible man, makes this request, it is because he knows, be assured, that Valentine will be terribly revenged. Is it not so, father?" The old man made a sign in the affirmative. Villefort continued, "He knows me, and I have pledged my word to him. Rest assured, gentlemen, that within 3 days, in a less time than justice would demand, the revenge I shall have taken for the murder of my child will be such as to make the boldest heart tremble." And as he spoke these words, he ground his teeth and grasped the old man's senseless hand. "Will this promise be fulfilled, men Noirtier?" asked Morrel, while d'Avrigny looked inquiringly. "Yes," replied Noirtier with an expression of sinister joy. "Swear, then," said Villefort, joining the hands of Morrel and d'Avrigny, "swear that you will spare the honor of my house and leave me to avenge my child." D'Avrigny turned round and uttered a very feeble "yes," but Morrel, disengaging his hand, rushed to the bed, and after having pressed the cold lips of Valentine with his own, hurriedly left, uttering a long, deep groan of despair and anguish. We have before stated that all the servants had fled. Maître de Villefort was therefore obliged to request Monsieur d'Avrigny to superintend all the arrangements consequent upon a death in a large city, more especially a death under such suspicious circumstances. It was something terrible to witness the silent agony, the mute despair of Noirtier, whose tears silently rolled down his cheeks. Villefort retired to his study, and d'Avrigny left to summon the doctor of the mayoralty, whose office it is to examine bodies after decease, and who is expressly named the Doctor of the Dead. And Noirtier could not be persuaded to quit his grandchild. At the end of a quarter of an hour, M. d'Avrigny returned with his associate. They found the outer gate closed, and not a servant remaining in the house. Villefort himself was obliged to open to them. But he stopped on the landing. He had not the courage to again visit the death chamber. The two doctors, therefore, entered the room alone. Noirtier was near the bed, pale, motionless, and silent as the corpse. The district doctor approached with the indifference of a man accustomed to spend half his time amongst the dead. He then lifted the sheet which was placed over the face, and just unclosed the lips. "Alas!" said d'Avrigny, "she is indeed dead, poor child." "Yes," answered the doctor laconically, dropping the sheet he had raised. Noirtier uttered a kind of hoarse, rattling sound. The old man's eyes sparkled, and the good doctor understood that he wished to behold his child. He therefore approached the bed, and while his companion was dipping the fingers with which he had touched the lips of the corpse in chloride of lime, he uncovered the calm and pale face, which looked like that of a sleeping angel. A tear, which appeared in the old man's eye, expressed his thanks to the doctor. The doctor of the dead then laid his permit on the corner of the table, and having fulfilled his duty, was conducted out by d'Avrigny. Villefort met them at the door of his study. Having in a few words thanked the district doctor, he turned to d'Avrigny and said, "And now the priest." "Is there any particular priest you wish to pray with, Valentine?" asked d'Avrigny. "No," said Villefort. "Fetch the nearest." "The nearest," said the district doctor, "is a good Italian abbé who lives next door to you. Shall I call on him as I pass?" "d'Avrigny," said Villefort, "be so kind, I beseech you, as to accompany this gentleman. Here is the key of the door, so that you can go in and out as you please. You will bring the priest with you, and will oblige me by introducing him into my child's room. Do you wish to see him? I only wish to be alone. You will excuse me, will you not? A priest can understand a father's grief." And M. de Villefort, giving the key to d'Avrigny, again bade farewell to the strange doctor, and retired to his study, where he began to work. For some temperaments, work is a remedy for all afflictions. As the doctors entered the street, they saw a man in a cassock standing on the threshold of the next door. "This is the abbé of whom I spoke," said the doctor to d'Avrigny. D'Avrigny accosted the priest. "Sir," he said, "are you disposed to confer a great obligation on an unhappy father who has just lost his daughter? I mean de Villefort, the king's attorney." "Ah," said the priest in a marked Italian accent. "Yes, I have heard that death is in that house." "Then I need not tell you what kind of service he requires of you." "I was about to offer myself, sir," said the priest. "It is our mission to forestall our duties." "It is a young girl." "I know it, sir. The servants who fled from the house informed me. I also know that her name is Valentine, and I have already prayed for her." "Thank you, sir," said d'Avrigny. "Since you have commenced your sacred office, deign to continue it. Come and watch by the dead, and all the wretched family will be grateful to you." "I am going, sir, and I do not hesitate to say that no prayers will be more fervent than mine." D'Avrigny took the priest's hand, and without meeting Villefort, who was engaged in his study, they reached Valentine's room, which on the following night was to be occupied by the undertakers. On entering the room, Noirtier's eyes met those of the abbé, and no doubt he read some particular expression in them, for he remained in the room. D'Avrigny recommended the attention of the priest to the living as well as to the dead, and the abbé promised to devote his prayers to Valentine and his attentions to Noirtier. In order, doubtless, that he might not be disturbed while fulfilling his sacred mission, the priest rose as soon as d'Avrigny departed, and not only bolted the door through which the doctor had just left, but also that leading to Madame de Villefort's room. Chapter 04. Danglars' signature. The next morning dawned dull and cloudy. During the night the undertakers had executed their melancholy office, and wrapped the corpse in the winding sheet, which, whatever may be said about the equality of death, is at least a last proof of the luxury so pleasing in life. This winding sheet was nothing more than a beautiful piece of cambric which the young girl had bought a fortnight before. During the evening, 2 men engaged for the purpose had carried Noirtier from Valentine's room into his own, and contrary to all expectation, there was no difficulty in withdrawing him from his child. The Abbé Busoni had watched till daylight, and then left without calling anyone. D'Avrigny returned about 8 o'clock in the morning. He met Villefort on his way to Noirtier's room, and accompanied him to see how the old man had slept. They found him in the large armchair, which served him for a bed, enjoying a calm, nay, almost a smiling sleep. They both stood in amazement at the door. "See," said d'Avrigny to Villefort, "nature knows how to alleviate the deepest sorrow. No one can say that Mess Noirtier did not love his child, and yet he sleeps." "Yes, you are right," replied Villefort, surprised. "He sleeps indeed, and this is the more strange, since the least contradiction keeps him awake all night." "Grief has stunned him," replied d'Avrigny, and they both returned thoughtfully to the procureur's study. "See, I have not slept," said Villefort, showing his undisturbed bed. "Grief does not stun me. I have not been in bed for 2 nights, but then look at my desk. See what I have written during these 2 days and nights. I have filled those papers, and have made out the accusation against the assassin Benedetto. Oh, work, work, my passion, my joy, my delight, it is for thee to alleviate my sorrows." And he convulsively grasped the hand of d'Avrigny. "Do you require my services now?" asked d'Avrigny. "No," said Villefort. "Only return again at 11 o'clock. At 12, oh heavens, my poor, poor child!" And the procureur, again becoming a man, lifted up his eyes and groaned. "Shall you be present in the reception-room?" "No, I have a cousin who has undertaken this sad office. I shall work, doctor. When I work, I forget everything." And indeed, no sooner had the doctor left the room than he was again absorbed in work. On the doorsteps, d'Avrigny met the cousin whom Villefort had mentioned, a personage as insignificant in our story as in the world he occupied, one of those beings designed from their birth to make themselves useful to others. He was punctual, dressed in black, with crape around his hat, and presented himself at his cousin's with a face made up for the occasion, and which he could alter as might be required. At 11 o'clock the morning coaches rolled into the paved court, and the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré was filled with a crowd of idlers, equally pleased to witness the festivities or the mourning of the rich, and who rush with the same avidity to a funeral procession as to the marriage of a duchess. Gradually the reception room filled, and some of our old friends made their appearance. We mean Debray, Chateau Renaud, and Beauchamp, accompanied by all the leading men of the day at the bar, in literature, or the army. For M. de Villefort moved in the first Parisian circles, less owing to his social position than to his personal merit. The cousin standing at the door ushered in the guests, and it was rather a relief to the indifferent to see a person as unmoved as themselves, and who did not exact a mournful face or force tears, as would have been the case with a father, a brother, or a lover. Those who were acquainted soon formed into little groups. One of them was made of Debray, Chateau Renaud, and Beauchamp. "Poor girl," said Debray, like the rest, paying an involuntary tribute to the sad event. "Poor girl, so young, so rich, so beautiful. Could you have imagined this scene, Chateau Renaud, when we saw her at the most 3 weeks ago about to sign that contract?" "Indeed, no," said Chateau Renaud. "Did you know her?" "I spoke to her once or twice at Madame de Morcerf's among the rest. She appeared to me charming, though rather melancholy. Where is her stepmother? Do you know?" "She is spending the day with the wife of the worthy gentleman who is receiving us." "Who is he? Whom do you mean?" "The gentleman who receives us? Is he a deputy?" "Oh, no, I am condemned to witness those gentlemen every day," said Beauchamp, "but he is perfectly unknown to me." "Have you mentioned this death in your paper?" "It has been mentioned, but the article is not mine. Indeed, I doubt if it will please M. Villefort, for it says that if 4 successive deaths had happened anywhere else than in the house of the king's attorney, he would have interested himself somewhat more about it." "Still," said Chateau Renaud, "Dr. d'Avrigny, who attends my mother, declares he is in despair about it. But whom are you seeking, Debray?" "I am seeking the Count of Monte Cristo," said the young man. "I met him on the boulevard, on my way here," said Beauchamp. "I think he is about to leave Paris. He was going to his banker." "His banker? Danglars is his banker, is he not?" asked Chateau Renaud of Debray. "I believe so," replied the secretary with slight uneasiness. "But Monte Cristo is not the only one I miss here. I do not see Morel." "Morel? Do they know him?" asked Chateau Renaud. "I think he has only been introduced to Madame de Villefort." "Still, he ought to have been here," said Debray. "I wonder what will be talked about tonight. This funeral is the news of the day. But hush! Here comes our Minister of Justice. He will feel obliged to make some little speech to the cousin." And the 3 young men drew near to listen. Beauchamp told the truth when he said that on his way to the funeral he had met Monte Cristo, who was directing his steps towards the Rue de la Chaussée-d'Antin, to Mess Danglars. The banker saw the carriage of the Count enter the courtyard, and advanced to meet him with a sad, though affable smile. "Well," said he, extending his hand to Monte Cristo, "I suppose you have come to sympathize with me, for indeed misfortune has taken possession of my house. When I perceived you, I was just asking myself whether I had not wished harm towards those poor Morcerfs, which would have justified the proverb of, 'He who wishes misfortunes to happen to others experiences them himself.' Well, on my word of honor, I answered, 'No, I wished no ill to Morcerf.' He was a little proud, perhaps, for a man who, like myself, has risen from nothing, but we all have our faults. Do you know, Count, that persons of our time of life, not that you belong to the class, you are still a young man, but as I was saying, persons of our time of life have been very unfortunate this year. For example, look at the puritanical procureur, who has just lost his daughter, and in fact nearly all his family, in so singular a manner. Morcerf dishonored and dead, and then myself covered with ridicule through the villainy of Benedetto. Besides what?" asked the Count. "Alas, do you not know? What new calamity? My daughter, Mademoiselle Danglars, Eugénie has left us." "Good heavens, what are you telling me?" "The truth, my dear Count. Oh, how happy you must be in not having either wife or children." "Do you think so?" "Indeed I do. And so Mademoiselle Danglars, she could not endure the insult offered to us by that wretch, so she asked permission to travel." "And is she gone?" "The other night she left." "With Madame Danglars?" "No, with a relation. But still, we have quite lost our dear Eugénie, for I doubt whether her pride will ever allow her to return to France." Still, Baron, said Monte Cristo, family griefs, or indeed any other affliction which would crush a man whose child was his only treasure, are endurable to a millionaire. Philosophers may well say, and practical men will always support the opinion, that money mitigates many trials. And if you admit the efficacy of this sovereign balm, you ought to be very easily consoled. You, the king of finance, the focus of immeasurable power. Danglars looked at him askance, as though to ascertain whether he spoke seriously. Yes, he answered, if a fortune brings consolation, I ought to be consoled. I am rich. So rich, dear sir, that your fortune resembles the pyramids. If you wished to demolish them, you could not, and if it were possible, you would not dare. Danglars smiled at the good-natured pleasantry of the Count. That reminds me, he said, that when you entered, I was on the point of signing 5 little bonds. I have already signed 2. Will you allow me to do the same to the others? Pray do so. There was a moment's silence, during which the noise of the banker's pen was alone heard, while Monte Cristo examined the gilt moldings on the ceiling. Are they Spanish, Haitian, or Neapolitan bonds? Said Monte Cristo. No, said Danglars, smiling. They are bonds on the Bank of France, payable to bearer. Stay, Count, he added, you who may be called the Emperor, if I claim the title of King of Finance, have you many pieces of paper of this size, each worth $1 million? The Count took into his hands the papers which Danglars had so proudly presented to him and read, To the Governor of the Bank, please pay to my order from the fund deposited by me the sum of $1 million and charge the same to my account. Baron Danglars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, said Monte Cristo. 5 millions? Why, what a Croesus you are! This is how I transact business, said Danglars. It is really wonderful, said the Count. Above all, if, as I suppose, it is payable at sight. It is indeed, said Danglars. It is a fine thing to have such credit. Really, it is only in France these things are done. 5 millions on 5 little scraps of paper. It must be seen to be believed. You do not doubt it? No. You say so with an accent. Stay, you shall be convinced. Take my clerk to the bank, and you will see him leave it with an order on the treasury for the same sum. No, said Monte Cristo, folding the 5 notes. Most decidedly not. The thing is so curious. I will make the experiment myself. I am credited on you for 6 millions. I have drawn 900,000 francs. You therefore still owe me 5 millions and 100,000 francs. I will take the 5 scraps of paper that I now hold as bonds, with your signature alone, and here is a receipt in full for the 6 millions between us. I had prepared it beforehand, for I am much in want of money today. And Monte Cristo placed the bonds in his pocket with one hand, while with the other he held out the receipt to Danglars. If a thunderbolt had fallen at the banker's feet, he could not have experienced greater terror. What? He stammered. Do you mean to keep that money? Excuse me, but I owe this money to the charity fund, a deposit which I promised to pay this morning. Oh, well then, said Monte Cristo, I am not particular about these 5 notes. Pay me in a different form. I wished, from curiosity, to take these, that I might be able to say that without any advice or preparation, the house of Danglars had paid me 5 millions without a minute's delay. It would have been remarkable. But here are your bonds. Pay me differently. And he held the bonds towards Danglars, who seized them like a vulture extending its claws to withhold the food that is being wrested from its grasp. Suddenly he rallied, made a violent effort to restrain himself, and then a smile gradually widened the features of his disturbed countenance. Certainly, he said, your receipt is money. Oh dear, yes, and if you were at Rome, the house of Thomson and French would make no more difficulty about paying the money on my receipt than you have just done. Pardon me, Count, pardon me. Then I may keep this money? Yes, said Danglars, while the perspiration started from the roots of his hair. Yes, keep it, keep it. Monte Cristo replaced the notes in his pocket with that indescribable expression which seemed to say, Come, reflect. If you repent, there is still time. No, said Danglars. No, decidedly no. Keep my signatures. But you know none are so formal as bankers in transacting business. I intended this money for the charity fund, and I seem to be robbing them if I did not pay them with these precise bonds. How absurd, as if one crown were not as good as another. Excuse me, and he began to laugh loudly but nervously. "Certainly I excuse you," said Monte Cristo graciously, "and pocket them." And he placed the bonds in his pocketbook. "But," said Danglars, "there is still a sum of 100,000 francs?" "Oh, a mere nothing," said Monte Cristo. "The balance would come to about that sum, but keep it and we shall be quits." "Count," said Danglars, "are you speaking seriously?" "I never joke with bankers," said Monte Cristo in a freezing manner which repelled impertinence, and he turned to the door just as the valet de chambre announced, "M. de Boville, Receiver-General of the Charities." "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo, "I think I arrived just in time to obtain your signatures, or they would have been disputed with me." Danglars again became pale and hastened to conduct the count out. Monte Cristo exchanged a ceremonious bow with M. de Boville, who was standing in the waiting-room, and who was introduced into Danglars' room as soon as the count had left. The count's serious face was illumined by a faint smile as he noticed the portfolio which the Receiver-General held in his hand. At the door, he found his carriage, and was immediately driven to the bank. Meanwhile, Danglars, repressing all emotion, advanced to meet the Receiver-General. We need not say that a smile of condescension was stamped upon his lips. "Good morning, creditor," said he, "for I wager anything it is the creditor who visits me." "You are right, Baron," answered M. de Boville. "The charities present themselves to you through me. The widows and orphans depute me to receive alms to the amount of 5 millions from you." "And yet they say orphans are to be pitied," said Danglars, wishing to prolong the jest. "Poor things! Here I am in their name," said M. de Boville. "But did you receive my letter yesterday?" "Yes." "I have brought my receipt. My dear M. de Boville, your widows and orphans must oblige me by waiting 24 hours, since Mess de Monte Cristo, whom you just saw leaving here, you did see him, I think?" "Yes, well?" "Well, Mess de Monte Cristo has just carried off their 5 millions. "How so?" "The Count has an unlimited credit upon me, a credit opened by Thomson and French of Rome. He came to demand 5 millions at once, which I paid him with checks on the bank. My funds are deposited there, and you can understand that if I draw out 10 millions on the same day it will appear rather strange to the governor." "2 days will be a different thing," said Danglars, smiling. "Come," said Boville, with a tone of entire incredulity, 5 millions to that gentleman who just left, and who bowed to me as though he knew me? Perhaps he knows you, though you do not know him. Me de Monte Cristo knows everybody. 5 millions! Here is his receipt. Believe your own eyes." M. de Boville took the paper Danglars presented him, and read, "Received of Baron Danglars the sum of 5,100,000 francs to be repaid on demand by the house of Thomson and French of Rome." "It is really true," said M. de Boville. "Do you know the house of Thomson and French?" "Yes, I once had business to transact with it to the amount of 200,000 francs, but since then I have not heard it mentioned." "It is one of the best houses in Europe," said Danglars, carelessly throwing down the receipt on his desk. "And he had 5 millions in your hands alone. Why, this Count of Monte Cristo must be a nabob? Indeed, I do not know what he is. He has 3 unlimited credits, one on me, one on Rothschild, one on Lafitte. And you see," he added carelessly, "he has given me the preference by leaving a balance of 100,000 francs. M. de Boville manifested signs of extraordinary admiration. "I must visit him," he said, "and obtain some pious grant from him. Oh, you may make sure of him. His charities alone amount to 20,000 francs a month. It is magnificent. I will set before him the example of Madame de Morcerf and her son." "What example?" "They gave all their fortune to the hospitals." "What fortune?" "Their own, M. de Morcerf's, who is deceased." "For what reason?" "Because they would not spend money so guiltily acquired. And what are they to live upon? The mother retires into the country, and the son enters the army. Well, I must confess, these are scruples. I registered their deed of gift yesterday. And how much did they possess? Oh, not much, from 12 to 1,300,000 francs. But to return to our millions." "Certainly," said Danglars in the most natural tone in the world. "Are you then pressed for this money?" "Yes, for the examination of our cash takes place tomorrow." "Tomorrow? Why did you not tell me so before? Why, it is as good as a century. At what hour does the examination take place?" "At 2 o'clock." "Send at 12," said Danglars, smiling. Monsieur de Boville said nothing, but nodded his head and took up the portfolio. "Now I think of it, you can do better," said Danglars. "How do you mean?" "The receipt of a Monte Cristo is as good as money. Take it to Rothschild's or Laffitte's, and they will take it off your hands at once." "What, though payable at Rome?" "Certainly. It will only cost you a discount of 5,000 or 6,000 francs." The receiver started back. "Ma foi," he said, "I prefer waiting till tomorrow. What a proposition!" "I thought, perhaps," said Danglars with supreme impertinence, "that you had a deficiency to make up." "Indeed," said the receiver, "and if that were the case, it would be worth while to make some sacrifice." "Thank you, no, sir." "Then it will be tomorrow." "Yes, but without fail." "Ah, you are laughing at me. Send tomorrow at 12, and the bank shall be notified." "I will come myself. Better still, since it will afford me the pleasure of seeing you." They shook hands. "By the way," said Monsieur de Boville, "are you not going to the funeral of poor Mademoiselle de Villefort, which I met on my road here?" "No," said the banker. "I have appeared rather ridiculous since that affair of Benedetto, so I remain in the background." "Bah, you are wrong. How were you to blame in that affair?" "Listen, when one bears an irreproachable name, as I do, one is rather sensitive." "Everybody pities you, sir, and above all, Mademoiselle Danglars." "Poor Eugénie," said Danglars. "Do you know she is going to embrace a religious life?" "No." "Alas, it is unhappily but too true. The day after the event, she decided on leaving Paris with a nun of her acquaintance. They are gone to seek a very strict convent in Italy or Spain." "Oh, it is terrible!" And Monsieur de Boville retired with this exclamation, after expressing acute sympathy with the father. But he had scarcely left before Danglars, with an energy of action those can alone understand who have seen Robert Macaire represented by Frederick, exclaimed, "Fool!" Then, enclosing Monte Cristo's receipt in a little pocket-book, he added, "Yes, come at 12 o'clock. I shall then be far away." Then he double-locked his door, emptied all his drawers, collected about 50,000 francs in banknotes, burned several papers, left others exposed to view, and then commenced writing a letter which he addressed, "To Madame la Baronne Danglars." "I will place it on her table myself tonight," he murmured. Then, taking a passport from his drawer, he said, "Good, it is available for 2 months longer." Chapter 105. The Cemetery of Père-Lachaise. Monsieur de Boville had indeed met the funeral procession which was taking Valentine to her last home on earth. The weather was dull and stormy. A cold wind shook the few remaining yellow leaves from the boughs of the trees and scattered them among the crowd which filled the boulevards. Monsieur de Villefort, a true Parisian, considered the cemetery of Père-Lachaise alone worthy of receiving the mortal remains of a Parisian family. There alone, the corpses belonging to him would be surrounded by worthy associates. He had therefore purchased a vault, which was quickly occupied by members of his family. On the front of the monument was inscribed, "The families of Saint-Méran and Villefort," for such had been the last wish expressed by poor Renée, Valentine's mother. The pompous procession therefore wended its way towards Père-Lachaise from the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Having crossed Paris, it passed through the Faubourg du Temple. Then, leaving the exterior boulevards, it reached the cemetery. More than 50 private carriages followed the 20 mourning coaches, and behind them more than 500 persons joined in the procession on foot. These last consisted of all the young people whom Valentine's death had struck like a thunderbolt, and who, notwithstanding the raw chilliness of the season, could not refrain from paying a last tribute to the memory of the beautiful, chaste, and adorable girl, thus cut off in the flower of her youth. As they left Paris, an equipage with 4 horses at full speed was seen to draw up suddenly. It contained Monte Cristo. The Count left the carriage and mingled in the crowd who followed on foot. Châteauneuf perceived him, and immediately alighting from his coupé, joined him. Beauchamp did the same. The Count looked attentively through every opening in the crowd. He was evidently watching for someone, but his search ended in disappointment. "Where is Morrel?" he asked. "Do either of these gentlemen know where he is?" "We have already asked that question," said Châteauneuf, "for none of us has seen him." The Count was silent, but continued to gaze around him. At length they arrived at the cemetery. The piercing eye of Monte Cristo glanced through clusters of bushes and trees, and was soon relieved from all anxiety, for seeing a shadow glide between the yew trees, Monte Cristo recognized him whom he sought. One funeral is generally very much like another in this magnificent metropolis. Black figures are seen scattered over the long white avenues. The silence of earth and heaven is alone broken by the noise made by the crackling branches of hedges planted around the monuments. Then follows the melancholy chant of the priests, mingled now and then with a sob of anguish, escaping from some woman concealed behind a mass of flowers. The shadow Monte Cristo had noticed passed rapidly behind the tomb of Abelard and Héloïse, placed itself close to the heads of the horses belonging to the hearse, and following the undertaker's men, arrived with them at the spot appointed for the burial. Each person's attention was occupied. Monte Cristo saw nothing but the shadow, which no one else observed. Twice the Count left the ranks to see whether the object of his interest had any concealed weapon beneath his clothes. When the procession stopped, this shadow was recognized as Morrel, who, with his coat buttoned up to his throat, his face livid, and convulsively crushing his hat between his fingers, leaned against a tree, situated on an elevation commanding the mausoleum, so that none of the funeral details could escape his observation. Everything was conducted in the usual manner. A few men, the least impressed of all by the scene, pronounced a discourse, some deploring this premature death, others expatiating on the grief of the father, and one very ingenious person quoting the fact that Valentine had solicited pardon of her father for criminals on whom the arm of justice was ready to fall, until at length they exhausted their stores of metaphor and mournful speeches, elaborate variations on the stanzas of Malherbe to Duperrier. Monte Cristo heard and saw nothing, or rather he only saw Morrel, whose calmness had a frightful effect on those who knew what was passing in his heart. "See," said Beauchamp, pointing out Morrel to Debray, "what is he doing up there?" And they called Chateau Renaud's attention to him. "How pale he is," said Chateau Renaud, shuddering. "He is cold," said Debray. "Not at all," said Chateau Renaud slowly. "I think he is violently agitated. He is very susceptible." "Bah," said Debray, "he scarcely knew Mademoiselle de Villefort. You said so yourself." "True. Still I remember he danced 3 times with her at Madame de Morcerf's. Do you recollect that ball, Count, where you produced such an effect?" "No, I do not," replied Monte Cristo, without even knowing of what or to whom he was speaking. So much was he occupied in watching Morrel, who was holding his breath with emotion. "The discourse is over. Farewell, gentlemen," said the Count unceremoniously, and he disappeared without anyone seeing whither he went. The funeral being over, the guests returned to Paris. Chateau Renaud looked for a moment for Morrel, but while they were watching the departure of the Count, Morrel had quitted his post, and Chateau Renaud, failing in his search, joined Debray and Beauchamp. Monte Cristo concealed himself behind a large tomb and awaited the arrival of Morrel, who by degrees approached the tomb now abandoned by spectators and workmen. Morrel threw a glance around, but before it reached the spot occupied by Monte Cristo, the latter had advanced yet nearer, still unperceived. The young man knelt down. The Count, with outstretched neck and glaring eyes, stood in an attitude ready to pounce upon Morrel upon the first occasion. Morrel bent his head till it touched the stone, then clutching the grating with both hands he murmured, "Oh, Valentine." The Count's heart was pierced by the utterance of these 2 words. He stepped forward and touching the young man's shoulder said, "I was looking for you, my friend." Monte Cristo expected a burst of passion, but he was deceived, for Morrel, turning round, said calmly, "You see, I was praying." The scrutinizing glance of the Count searched the young man from head to foot. He then seemed more easy. "Shall I drive you back to Paris?" he asked. "No, thank you." "Do you wish anything?" "Leave me to pray." The Count withdrew without opposition, but it was only to place himself in a situation where he could watch every movement of Morrel, who at length arose, brushed the dust from his knees, and turned towards Paris, without once looking back. He walked slowly down the Rue de la Roquette. The Count, dismissing his carriage, followed him about 100 paces behind. Maximilian crossed the canal and entered the Rue Meslay by the boulevards. 5 minutes after the door had been closed on Morrel's entrance, it was again opened for the Count. Julie was at the entrance of the garden, where she was attentively watching Penelon, who, entering with zeal into his profession of gardener, was very busy grafting some Bengal roses. "Ah, Count!" she exclaimed, with the delight manifested by every member of the family whenever he visited the Rue Meslay. "Maximilian has just returned, has he not, madame?" asked the Count. "Yes, I think I saw him pass, but pray, call Emmanuel." "Excuse me, madame, but I must go up to Maximilian's room this instant," replied Monte Cristo. "I have something of the greatest importance to tell him." "Go then," she said with a charming smile, which accompanied him until he had disappeared. Monte Cristo soon ran up the staircase conducting from the ground floor to Maximilian's room. When he reached the landing, he listened attentively, but all was still. Like many old houses occupied by a single family, the room door was paneled with glass, but it was locked. Maximilian was shut in, and it was impossible to see what was passing in the room, because a red curtain was drawn before the glass. The Count's anxiety was manifested by a bright color which seldom appeared on the face of that imperturbable man. "What shall I do?" he uttered, and reflected for a moment. "Shall I ring? No, the sound of a bell, announcing a visitor, will but accelerate the resolution of one in Maximilian's situation, and then the bell would be followed by a louder noise." Monte Cristo trembled from head to foot, and as if his determination had been taken with the rapidity of lightning, he struck one of the panes of glass with his elbow. The glass was shivered to atoms. Then, withdrawing the curtain, he saw Morrel, who had been writing at his desk, bound from his seat at the noise of the broken window. "I beg 1,000 pardons," said the Count. "There is nothing the matter, but I slipped down and broke one of your panes of glass with my elbow. Since it is opened, I will take advantage of it to enter your room. Do not disturb yourself. Do not disturb yourself." And passing his hand through the broken glass, the Count opened the door. Morrel, evidently discomposed, came to meet Monte Cristo less with the intention of receiving him than to exclude his entry. "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo, rubbing his elbow, "it's all your servant's fault. Your stairs are so polished, it is like walking on glass." "Are you hurt, sir?" coldly asked Morrel. "I believe not. But what are you about there? You were writing." "I? Your fingers are stained with ink." "Ah, true, I was writing. I do sometimes, soldier though I am." Monte Cristo advanced into the room. Maximilian was obliged to let him pass, but he followed him. "You were writing?" said Monte Cristo with a searching look. "I have already had the honor of telling you I was," said Morrel. The Count looked around him. "Your pistols are beside your desk," said Monte Cristo, pointing with his finger to the pistols on the table. "I am on the point of starting on a journey," replied Morrel disdainfully. "My friend," exclaimed Monte Cristo in a tone of exquisite sweetness. "Sir?" "My friend, my dear Maximilian, do not make a hasty resolution, I entreat you." "I make a hasty resolution?" said Morrel, shrugging his shoulders. "Is there anything extraordinary in a journey?" "Maximilian," said the Count, "let us both lay aside the mask we have assumed. You no more deceive me with that false calmness than I impose upon you with my frivolous solicitude. You can understand, can you not, that to have acted as I have done, to have broken that glass, to have intruded on the solitude of a friend, you can understand that, to have done all this, I must have been actuated by real uneasiness, or rather by a terrible conviction. Morrel, you are going to destroy yourself." "Indeed, Count," said Morrel, shuddering, "what has put this into your head?" "I tell you that you are about to destroy yourself," continued the Count, "and here is proof of what I say." And, approaching the desk, he removed the sheet of paper which Morrel had placed over the letter he had begun, and took the latter in his hands. Morrel rushed forward to tear it from him, but Monte Cristo, perceiving his intention, seized his wrist with his iron grasp. "You wish to destroy yourself," said the Count. "You have written it." "Well," said Morrel, changing his expression of calmness for one of violence, "well, and if I do intend to turn this pistol against myself, who shall prevent me? Who will dare prevent me? All my hopes are blighted, my heart is broken, my life a burden, everything around me is sad and mournful. Earth has become distasteful to me, and human voices distract me. It is a mercy to let me die, for if I live I shall lose my reason and become mad. When, sir, I tell you all this with tears of heartfelt anguish, can you reply that I am wrong? Can you prevent my putting an end to my miserable existence? Tell me, sir, could you have the courage to do so?" "Yes, Morrel," said Monte Cristo, with a calmness which contrasted strangely with the young man's excitement. Yes, I would do so. You? Exclaimed Morrel with increasing anger and reproach. You, who have deceived me with false hopes, who have cheered and soothed me with vain promises, when I might, if not have saved her, at least have seen her die in my arms. You, who pretend to understand everything, even the hidden sources of knowledge, and who enact the part of a guardian angel upon earth, and could not even find an antidote to a poison administered to a young girl. Ah, sir, indeed you would inspire me with pity, were you not hateful in my eyes. Yes, you tell me to lay aside the mask, and I will do so, be satisfied. When you spoke to me at the cemetery, I answered you. My heart was softened. When you arrived here, I allowed you to enter. But since you abuse my confidence, since you have devised a new torture after I thought I had exhausted them all, then, Count of Monte Cristo, my pretended benefactor, then, Count of Monte Cristo, the universal guardian, be satisfied, you shall witness the death of your friend. And Morrel, with a maniacal laugh, again rushed towards the pistols. And I again repeat, you shall not commit suicide. Prevent me, then, replied Morrel, with another struggle, which, like the first, failed in releasing him from the Count's iron grasp. I will prevent you. And who are you, then, that arrogate to yourself this tyrannical right over free and rational beings? Who am I? Repeated Monte Cristo. Listen, I am the only man in the world having the right to say to you, Morrel, your father's son shall not die today. And Monte Cristo, with an expression of majesty and sublimity, advanced with arms folded toward the young man, who, involuntarily overcome by the commanding manner of this man, recoiled a step. "Why do you mention my father?" stammered he. "Why do you mingle a recollection of him with the affairs of today?" "Because I am he who saved your father's life when he wished to destroy himself, as you do today. Because I am the man who sent the purse to your young sister and the pharaon to old Morrel. Because I am the Edmond Dantes who nursed you a child on my knees." Morrel made another step back, staggering, breathless, crushed. Then all his strength gave way, and he fell prostrate at the feet of Monte Cristo. Then his admirable nature underwent a complete and sudden revulsion. He arose, rushed out of the room and to the stairs, exclaiming energetically, "Julie! Julie! Emmanuel! Emmanuel!" Monte Cristo endeavored also to leave, but Maximilian would have died rather than relax his hold of the handle of the door, which he closed upon the Count. Julie, Emmanuel, and some of the servants ran up in alarm on hearing the cries of Maximilian. Morrel seized their hands, and opening the door exclaimed in a voice choked with sobs, "On your knees! On your knees! He is our benefactor, the savior of our father. He is—" He would have added, "Edmond Dantes," but the Count seized his arm and prevented him. Julie threw herself into the arms of the Count. Emmanuel embraced him as a guardian angel. Morrel again fell on his knees and struck the ground with his forehead. Then the iron-hearted man felt his heart swell in his breast. A flame seemed to rush from his throat to his eyes. He bent his head and wept. For a while nothing was heard in the room but a succession of sobs, while the incense from their grateful hearts mounted to heaven. Julie had scarcely recovered from her deep emotion when she rushed out of the room, descended to the next floor, ran into the drawing-room with childlike joy and raised the crystal globe which covered the purse given by the unknown of the Allée de Meilhan. Meanwhile, Emmanuel in a broken voice said to the Count, "O Count, how could you, hearing us so often speak of our unknown benefactor, seeing us pay such homage of gratitude and adoration to his memory, how could you continue so long without discovering yourself to us? Oh, it was cruel to us, and, dare I say it, to you also." "Listen, my friends," said the Count. "I may call you so, since we have really been friends for the last 11 years. The discovery of this secret has been occasioned by a great event which you must never know. I wished to bury it during my whole life in my own bosom, but your brother Maximilian wrested it from me by a violence he repents of now, I am sure." Then turning around, and seeing that Morrel, still on his knees, had thrown himself into an armchair, he added in a low voice, pressing Emmanuel's hand significantly, "Watch over him." "Why so?" asked the young man, surprised. "I cannot explain myself, but watch over him." Emmanuel looked around the room and caught sight of the pistols. His eyes rested on the weapons, and he pointed to them. Monte Cristo bent his head. Emmanuel went towards the pistols. "Leave them," said Monte Cristo. Then walking towards Morel, he took his hand. The tumultuous agitation of the young man was succeeded by a profound stupor. Julie returned, holding the silken purse in her hands, while tears of joy rolled down her cheeks, like dewdrops on the rose. "Here is the relic," she said. "Do not think it will be less dear to us now we are acquainted with our benefactor." "My child," said Monte Cristo, coloring, "allow me to take back that purse. Since you now know my face, I wish to be remembered alone through the affection I hope you will grant me." "Oh," said Julie, pressing the purse to her heart, "no, no, I beseech you do not take it. For some unhappy day you will leave us, will you not?" "You have guessed rightly, madame," replied Monte Cristo, smiling. "In a week I shall have left this country, where so many persons who merit the vengeance of heaven lived happily, while my father perished of hunger and grief." While announcing his departure, the Count fixed his eyes on Morel, and remarked that the words, "I shall have left this country," had failed to rouse him from his lethargy. He then saw that he must make another struggle against the grief of his friend, and taking the hands of Emmanuel and Julie, which he pressed within his own, he said with the mild authority of a father, "My kind friends, leave me alone with Maximilian." Julie saw the means offered of carrying off her precious relic, which Monte Cristo had forgotten. She drew her husband to the door. "Let us leave them," she said. The Count was alone with Morel, who remained motionless as a statue. "Come," said Monte Cristo, touching his shoulder with his finger. "Are you a man again, Maximilian?" "Yes, for I begin to suffer again." The Count frowned, apparently in gloomy hesitation. "Maximilian, Maximilian," he said, "the ideas you yield to are unworthy of a Christian." "Oh, do not fear, my friend," said Morel, raising his head and smiling with a sweet expression on the Count. "I shall no longer attempt my life." "Then we are to have no more pistols, no more despair?" "No, I have found a better remedy for my grief than either a bullet or a knife." "Poor fellow, what is it? My grief will kill me of itself." "My friend," said Monte Cristo, with an expression of melancholy equal to his own, "listen to me. One day, in a moment of despair like yours, since it led to a similar resolution, I also wished to kill myself. One day your father, equally desperate, wished to kill himself too. If anyone had said to your father, at the moment he raised the pistol to his head, if anyone had told me, when in my prison I pushed back the food I had not tasted for 3 days, if anyone had said to either of us then, 'Live, the day will come when you will be happy and will bless life,' no matter whose voice had spoken, we should have heard him with the smile of doubt or the anguish of incredulity. And yet how many times has your father blessed life while embracing you? How often have I myself—" "Ah," exclaimed Morel, interrupting the Count, "you had only lost your liberty, my father had only lost his fortune, but I have lost Valentine." "Look at me," said Monte Cristo, with that expression which sometimes made him so eloquent and persuasive. "Look at me. There are no tears in my eyes, nor is there fever in my veins, yet I see you suffer, you, Maximilian, whom I love as my own son. Well, does not this tell you that in grief, as in life, there is always something to look forward to beyond? Now, if I entreat, if I order you to live, Morel, it is in the conviction that one day you will thank me for having preserved your life." "Oh, heavens," said the young man, "oh, heavens, what are you saying, Count? Take care. But perhaps you have never loved." "Child," replied the Count, "I mean as I love. You see, I have been a soldier ever since I attained manhood. I reached the age of 29 without loving, for none of the feelings I before then experienced merit the appellation of love. Well, at 29 I saw Valentine. For 2 years I have loved her. For 2 years I have seen written in her heart, as in a book, all the virtues of a daughter and wife. Count, to possess Valentine would have been a happiness too infinite, too ecstatic, too complete, too divine for this world, since it has been denied me. But without Valentine the earth is desolate." "I have told you to hope," said the Count. "Then have a care, I repeat, for you seek to persuade me, and if you succeed I should lose my reason, for I should hope that I could again behold Valentine." The Count smiled. "My friend, my father," said Morel with excitement, "have a care, I again repeat, for the power you wield over me alarms me. Weigh your words before you speak, for my eyes have already become brighter and my heart beats strongly. Be cautious, or you will make me believe in supernatural agencies. I must obey you, though you bade me call forth the dead or walk upon the water." "Hope, my friend," repeated the Count. "Ah," said Morrel, falling from the height of excitement to the abyss of despair. "Ah, you are playing with me, like those good, or rather selfish mothers who soothe their children with honeyed words because their screams annoy them. No, my friend, I was wrong to caution you. Do not fear. I will bury my grief so deep in my heart, I will disguise it so, that you shall not even care to sympathize with me. Adieu, my friend, adieu." "On the contrary," said the Count, "after this time you must live with me. You must not leave me, and in a week we shall have left France behind us. And you still bid me hope? I tell you to hope, because I have a method of curing you. Count, you render me sadder than before, if it be possible. You think the result of this blow has been to produce an ordinary grief, and you would cure it by an ordinary remedy, change of scene." And Morrel dropped his head with disdainful incredulity. "What can I say more?" asked Monte Cristo. "I have confidence in the remedy I propose, and only ask you to permit me to assure you of its efficacy." "Count, you prolong my agony." "Then," said the Count, "your feeble spirit will not even grant me the trial I request? Come, do you know of what the Count of Monte Cristo is capable? Do you know that he holds terrestrial beings under his control? Nay, that he can almost work a miracle? Well, wait for the miracle I hope to accomplish." "Or," repeated Morrel, "or take care, Morrel, lest I call you ungrateful. Have pity on me, Count. I feel so much pity towards you, Maximilian, that, listen to me attentively, if I do not cure you in a month, to the day, to the very hour, mark my words, Morrel, I will place loaded pistols before you, and a cup of the deadliest Italian poison, a poison more sure and prompt than that which has killed Valentine. Will you promise me? Yes, for I am a man, and have suffered like yourself, and also contemplated suicide. Indeed, often since misfortune has left me, I have longed for the delights of an eternal sleep." "But you are sure you will promise me this?" said Morrel, intoxicated. "I not only promise, but swear it," said Monte Cristo, extending his hand. "In a month, then, on your honor, if I am not consoled, you will let me take my life into my own hands, and whatever may happen, you will not call me ungrateful?" "In a month, to the day, the very hour, and the date is a sacred one, Maximilian. I do not know whether you remember that this is the 5th of September. It is 10 years today since I saved your father's life, who wished to die." Morrel seized the Count's hand and kissed it. The Count allowed him to pay the homage he felt due to him. "In a month you will find on the table, at which we shall be then sitting, good pistols and a delicious draught. But on the other hand, you must promise me not to attempt your life before that time." "Oh, I also swear it." Monte Cristo drew the young man towards him and pressed him for some time to his heart. "And now," he said, "after today you will come and live with me. You can occupy Haydée's apartment, and my daughter will at least be replaced by my son." "Haydée?" said Morrel. "What has become of her?" "She departed last night." "To leave you?" "To wait for me. Hold yourself ready then to join me at the Champs-Élysées, and lead me out of this house without anyone seeing my departure." Maximilian hung his head and obeyed with childlike reverence. Chapter 106. Dividing the Proceeds. The apartment on the first floor of the house in the Rue Saint-Germain-des-Prés, where Albert de Morcerf had selected a home for his mother, was let to a very mysterious person. This was a man whose face the concierge himself had never seen, for in the winter his chin was buried in one of the large red handkerchiefs worn by gentlemen's coachmen on a cold night. And in the summer he made a point of always blowing his nose just as he approached the door. Contrary to custom, this gentleman had not been watched, for as the report ran that he was a person of high rank and one who would allow no impertinent interference, his incognito was strictly respected. His visits were tolerably regular, though occasionally he appeared a little before or after his time, but generally, both in summer and winter, he took possession of his apartment about 4 o'clock, though he never spent the night there. At 3:30 in the winter, the fire was lighted by the discreet servant, who had the superintendence of the little apartment, and in the summer ices were placed on the table at the same hour. At 4 o'clock, as we have already stated, the mysterious personage arrived. 20 minutes afterwards, a carriage stopped at the house. a lady alighted in a black or dark blue dress, and always thickly veiled. She passed like a shadow through the lodge, and ran upstairs without a sound escaping under the touch of her light foot. No one ever asked her where she was going. Her face, therefore, like that of the gentleman, was perfectly unknown to the two concierges, who were perhaps unequaled throughout the capital for discretion. We need not say she stopped at the first floor. Then she tapped in a peculiar manner at a door, which after being opened to admit her was again fastened, and curiosity penetrated no farther. They used the same precautions in leaving as in entering the house. The lady always left first, and as soon as she had stepped into her carriage it drove away, sometimes towards the right hand, sometimes to the left. Then about 20 minutes afterwards the gentleman would also leave, buried in his cravat or concealed by his handkerchief. The day after Monte Cristo had called upon Danglars, the mysterious lodger entered at 10 o'clock in the morning instead of 4 in the afternoon. Almost directly afterwards, without the usual interval of time, a cab arrived, and the veiled lady ran hastily upstairs. The door opened, but before it could be closed, the lady exclaimed, "Oh, Lucien! Oh, my friend!" The concierge therefore heard for the first time that the lodger's name was Lucien. Still, as he was the very perfection of a doorkeeper, he made up his mind not to tell his wife. "Well, what is the matter, my dear?" asked the gentleman whose name the lady's agitation revealed. "Tell me what is the matter." "Oh, Lucien, can I confide in you?" "Of course, you know you can do so. But what can be the matter? Your note of this morning has completely bewildered me. This precipitation, this unusual appointment. Come, ease me of my anxiety, or else frighten me at once." "Lucien, a great event has happened," said the lady, glancing inquiringly at Lucien. "Danglars left last night." "Left? Danglars left? Where has he gone?" "I do not know." "What do you mean? Has he gone intending not to return?" "Undoubtedly. At 10 o'clock at night his horses took him to the barrier of Charenton. There a post-chaise was waiting for him. He entered it with his valet de chambre, saying that he was going to Fontainebleau." "Then what did you mean?" "Stay, he left a letter for me." "A letter? Yes, read it." And the Baroness took from her pocket a letter which she gave to Debray. Debray paused a moment before reading, as if trying to guess its contents, or perhaps while making up his mind how to act, whatever it might contain. No doubt his ideas were arranged in a few minutes, for he began reading the letter which caused so much uneasiness in the heart of the Baroness, and which ran as follows: "Madame and most faithful wife." Debray mechanically stopped and looked at the Baroness, whose face became covered with blushes. "Read," she said. Debray continued, "When you receive this, you will no longer have a husband. Oh, you need not be alarmed. You will only have lost him as you have lost your daughter. I mean that I shall be traveling on one of the 30 or 40 roads leading out of France. I owe you some explanations for my conduct, and as you are a woman that can perfectly understand me, I will give them. Listen, then. I received this morning 5 millions, which I paid away. Almost directly afterwards, another demand for the same sum was presented to me. I put this creditor off till tomorrow, and I intend leaving today, to escape that tomorrow, which would be rather too unpleasant for me to endure. You understand this, do you not, my most precious wife? I say you understand this because you are as conversant with my affairs as I am. Indeed, I think you understand them better, since I am ignorant of what has become of a considerable portion of my fortune, once very tolerable, while I am sure, madame, that you know perfectly well. For women have infallible instincts. They can even explain the marvelous by an algebraic calculation they have invented. But I, who only understand my own figures, know nothing more than that one day these figures deceived me. Have you admired the rapidity of my fall? Have you been slightly dazzled at the sudden fusion of my ingots? I confess I have seen nothing but the fire. Let us hope you have found some gold among the ashes. With this consoling idea I leave you, madam, and most prudent wife, without any conscientious reproach for abandoning you. You have friends left, and the ashes I have already mentioned, and above all the liberty I hasten to restore to you. And here, madam, I must add another word of explanation. So long as I hoped you were working for the good of our house and for the fortune of our daughter, I philosophically closed my eyes. But as you have transformed that house into a vast ruin, I will not be the foundation of another man's fortune. You were rich when I married you, but little respected. Excuse me for speaking so very candidly, but as this is intended only for ourselves, I do not see why I should weigh my words. I have augmented our fortune, and it has continued to increase during the last 15 years, till extraordinary and unexpected catastrophes have suddenly overturned it. Without any fault of mine, I can honestly declare. You, madam, have only sought to increase your own, and I am convinced that you have succeeded. I leave you, therefore, as I took you, rich but little respected. Adieu. I also intend from this time to work on my own account. Accept my acknowledgments for the example you have set me and which I intend following. Your very devoted husband, Baron Danglars. The Baroness had watched Debray while he read this long and painful letter, and saw him, notwithstanding his self-control, change color once or twice. When he had ended the perusal, he folded the letter and resumed his pensive attitude. "Well?" asked Madame Danglars, with an anxiety easy to be understood. "Well, madame?" unhesitatingly repeated Debray. "With what ideas does that letter inspire you?" "Oh, it is simple enough, madame. It inspires me with the idea that M. Danglars has left suspiciously." "Certainly, but is this all you have to say to me?" "I do not understand you," said Debray with freezing coldness. "He is gone, never to return." "Oh, madame, do not think that. I tell you he will never return. I know his character. He is inflexible in any resolutions formed for his own interests. If he could have made any use of me, he would have taken me with him. He leaves me in Paris, as our separation will conduce to his benefit. Therefore he is gone, and I am free forever," added Madame Danglars, in the same supplicating tone. Debray, instead of answering, allowed her to remain in an attitude of nervous inquiry. "Well," she said at length, "do you not answer me? I have but one question to ask you. What do you intend to do?" "I was going to ask you," replied the Baroness with a beating heart. "Ah, then, you wish to ask advice of me?" "Yes, I do wish to ask your advice," said Madame Danglars with anxious expectation. "Then if you wish to take my advice," said the young man coldly, "I would recommend you to travel." "To travel," she murmured. "Certainly, as M. Danglars says, you are rich and perfectly free. In my opinion, a withdrawal from Paris is absolutely necessary after the double catastrophe of Mademoiselle Danglars' broken contract and M. Danglars' disappearance. The world will think you abandoned and poor, for the wife of a bankrupt would never be forgiven, were she to keep up an appearance of opulence. You have only to remain in Paris for about a fortnight, telling the world you are abandoned, and relating the details of this desertion to your best friends, who will soon spread the report. Then you can quit your house, leaving your jewels and giving up your jointer, and everyone's mouth will be filled with praises of your disinterestedness. They will know you are deserted and think you also poor, for I alone know your real financial position, and am quite ready to give up my accounts as an honest partner." The dread with which the pale and motionless Baroness listened to this was equaled by the calm indifference with which Debray had spoken. "Deserted?" she repeated. "Ah, yes, I am indeed deserted. You are right, sir, and no one can doubt my position." These were the only words that this proud and violently enamored woman could utter in response to Debray. "But then you are rich, very rich indeed," continued Debray, taking out some papers from his pocketbook, which he spread upon the table. Madame Danglars did not see them. She was engaged in stilling the beatings of her heart and restraining the tears which were ready to gush forth. At length a sense of dignity prevailed, and if she did not entirely master her agitation, she at least succeeded in preventing the fall of a single tear. "Madame," said Debray, "it is nearly 6 months since we have been associated. You furnished a principal of 100,000 francs. Our partnership began in the month of April. In May we commenced operations, and in the course of the month gained 450,000 francs. In June, the profit amounted to 900,000. In July, we added 1,700,000 francs. It was, the month of the Spanish bonds. In August, we lost 300,000 francs at the beginning of the month. But on the 13th, we made up for it, and we now find that our accounts, reckoning from the first day of partnership up to yesterday when I closed them, showed a capital of 400,000 francs, That is 1,200,000 for each of us. Now, madame, said Debray, delivering up his accounts in the methodical manner of a stockbroker, there are still 80,000 francs, the interest of this money in my hands. But, said the Baroness, I thought you never put the money out to interest. Excuse me, madame, said Debray coldly. I had your permission to do so, and I have made use of it. There are, then, 40,000 francs for your share, besides the 100,000 you furnished me to begin with, making in all 1,140,000 francs for your portion. Now, madam, I took the precaution of drawing out your money the day before yesterday. It is not long ago, you see, and I was in continual expectation of being called on to deliver up my accounts. There is your money, half in banknotes, the other half in checks payable to bearer. I say there, for as I did not consider my house safe enough, or lawyers sufficiently discreet, and as landed property carries evidence with it, and moreover, since you have no right to possess anything independent of your husband, I have kept this sum, now your whole fortune, in a chest concealed under that closet, and for greater security I myself concealed it there. Now, madame, continued Debray, first opening the closet, then the chest. Now, madame, here are 800 notes of 1,000 francs each, resembling as you see a large book bound in iron. To this I add a certificate in the funds of 25,000 francs. Then, for the odd cash, making I think about 110,000 francs, here is a check upon my banker, who, not being M. Danglars, will pay you the amount, you may rest assured. Madame Danglars mechanically took the check, the bond, and the heap of banknotes. This enormous fortune made no great appearance on the table. Madame Danglars, with tearless eyes, but with her breast heaving with concealed emotion, placed the banknotes in her bag, put the certificate and check into her pocketbook, and then, standing pale and mute, awaited one kind word of consolation. But she waited in vain. Now, madam, said Debray, you have a splendid fortune, an income of about 60,000 livres a year, which is enormous for a woman who cannot keep an establishment here for a year at least. You will be able to indulge all your fancies. Besides, should you find your income insufficient, you can, for the sake of the past, madam, make use of mine, and I am ready to offer you all I possess on loan. Thank you, sir, thank you, replied the Baroness. You forget that what you have just paid me is much more than a poor woman requires, who intends for some time at least to retire from the world. Debray was for a moment surprised, but immediately recovering himself, he bowed with an air which seemed to say, "As you please, madame." Madame Danglars had until then, perhaps, hoped for something, but when she saw the careless bow of Debray and the glance by which it was accompanied, together with his significant silence, she raised her head, and without passion or violence or even hesitation ran downstairs, disdaining to address a last farewell to one who could thus part from her. "Bah!" said Debray when she had left. "These are fine projects. She will remain at home, read novels, and speculate at cards, since she can no longer do so on the bourse." Then, taking up his account book, he cancelled with the greatest care all the entries of the amounts he had just paid away. "I have 160,000 francs remaining," he said. "What a pity Mademoiselle de Villefort is dead! She suited me in every respect, and I would have married her." And he calmly waited until the 20 minutes had elapsed after Madame Danglars' departure before he left the house. During this time he occupied himself in making figures, with his watch by his side. Asmodeus, that diabolical personage, who would have been created by every fertile imagination if Lesage had not acquired the priority in his great masterpiece, would have enjoyed a singular spectacle if he had lifted up the roof of the little house in the Rue Saint-Germain-des-Prés, while Debray was casting up his figures. Above the room, in which Debray had been dividing 2,5 millions with Madame Danglars, was another, inhabited by persons who have played too prominent a part in the incidents we have related for their appearance not to create some interest. Mercédès and Albert were in that room. Mercédès was much changed within the last few days. Not that even in her days of fortune she had ever dressed with the magnificent display which makes us no longer able to recognize a woman when she appears in a plain and simple attire, nor indeed had she fallen into that state of depression where it is impossible to conceal the garb of misery. No, the change in Mercedes was that her eye no longer sparkled, her lips no longer smiled, and there was now a hesitation in uttering the words which formerly sprang so fluently from her ready wit. It was not poverty which had broken her spirit. It was not a want of courage which rendered her poverty burdensome. Mercedes, although deposed from the exalted position she had occupied, lost in the sphere she had now chosen, like a person passing from a room splendidly lighted into utter darkness, appeared like a queen, fallen from her palace to a hovel, and who, reduced to strict necessity, could neither become reconciled to the earthen vessels she was herself forced to place upon the table, nor to the humble pallet which had become her bed. The beautiful Catalan and noble countess had lost both her proud glance and charming smile, because she saw nothing but misery around her. The walls were hung with one of the gray papers which economical landlords choose as not likely to show the dirt. The floor was uncarpeted. The furniture attracted the attention to the poor attempt at luxury. Indeed, everything offended eyes accustomed to refinement and elegance. Madame de Morcerf had lived there since leaving her house. The continual silence of the spot oppressed her. Still, seeing that Albert continually watched her countenance to judge the state of her feelings, she constrained herself to assume a monotonous smile of the lips alone, which, contrasted with the sweet and beaming expression that usually shone from her eyes, seemed like moonlight on a statue, yielding light without warmth. Albert, too, was ill at ease. The remains of luxury prevented him from sinking into his actual position. If he wished to go out without gloves, his hands appeared too white. If he wished to walk through the town, his boots seemed too highly polished. Yet these two noble and intelligent creatures, united by the indissoluble ties of maternal and filial love, had succeeded in tacitly understanding one another and economizing their stores, and Albert had been able to tell his mother without extorting a change of countenance, "Mother, we have no more money." Mercedes had never known misery. She had often, in her youth, spoken of poverty, but between want and necessity, those synonymous words, there is a wide difference. Amongst the Catalans, Mercedes wished for 1,000 things, but still she never really wanted any. So long as the nets were good, they caught fish, and so long as they sold their fish, they were able to buy twine for new nets. And then, shut out from friendship, having but one affection, which could not be mixed up with her ordinary pursuits, she thought of herself, of no one but herself. Upon the little she earned, she lived as well as she could. Now there were two to be supported, and nothing to live upon. Winter approached. Mercedes had no fire in that cold and naked room. She who was accustomed to stoves which heated the house from the hall to the boudoir, she had not even one little flower. She whose apartment had been a conservatory of costly exotics, but she had her son. Hitherto the excitement of fulfilling a duty had sustained them. Excitement, like enthusiasm, sometimes renders us unconscious to the things of earth. But the excitement had calmed down, and they felt themselves obliged to descend from dreams to reality. After having exhausted the ideal, they found they must talk of the actual. "Mother," exclaimed Albert, just as Madame Danglars was descending the stairs, "let us reckon our riches, if you please. I want capital to build my plans upon." "Capital? Nothing," replied Mercedes with a mournful smile. "No, mother, capital 3,000 francs, and I have an idea of our leading a delightful life upon this 3,000 francs. "Child!" sighed Mercedes. "Alas, dear mother," said the young man, "I have unhappily spent too much of your money not to know the value of it. These 3,000 francs are enormous, and I intend building upon this foundation a miraculous certainty for the future." "You say this, my dear boy, but do you think we ought to accept these 3,000 francs?" said Mercedes, coloring. "I think so," answered Albert in a firm tone. "We will accept them the more readily, since we have them not here. You know they are buried in the garden of the little house in the Allée de Meilhan at Marseille. With 200 francs we can reach Marseille." "With 200 francs? Are you sure, Albert?" "Oh, as for that, I have made inquiries respecting the diligences and steamboats, and my calculations are made. You will take your place in the coupé de Chalon. You see, mother, I treat you handsomely for 35 francs." Albert then took a pen and wrote, "First coupé, 35 francs. 35. From Chalon to Lyons you will go on by the steamboat. 6. From Lyon to Avignon, still by steamboat. 16. From Avignon to Marseille, 7 francs. 7. Expenses on the road, about 50 francs. 50. Total, for 114 francs. Let us put down 120, added Albert, smiling. You see I am generous, am I not, mother? But you, my poor child? Do you not see that I reserve 80 francs for myself? A young man does not require luxuries. Besides, I know what traveling is. With a post-chaise and valet de chambre? Anyway, mother. Well, be it so. But these 200 francs? Here they are, and 200 more besides. See, I have sold my watch for 100 francs, and the guard and seals for 300. How fortunate that the ornaments were worth more than the watch. Still the same story of superfluities. Now I think we are rich, since instead of the 114 francs we require for the journey, we find ourselves in possession of 250. But we owe something in this house? 30 francs. But I pay that out of my 150 francs. That is understood. And as I require only 80 francs for my journey, you see I am overwhelmed with luxury. But that is not all. What do you say to this, mother? And Albert took out of a little pocket-book with golden clasps a remnant of his old fancies, or perhaps a tender souvenir from one of the mysterious and veiled ladies who used to knock at his little door. Albert took out of this pocket-book a note of 1,000 francs. "What is this?" asked Mercédès. "1,000 francs. But whence have you obtained them? Listen to me, mother, and do not yield too much to agitation." And Albert, rising, kissed his mother on both cheeks, then stood looking at her. "You cannot imagine, mother, how beautiful I think you," said the young man, impressed with a profound feeling of filial love. "You are indeed the most beautiful and most noble woman I ever saw." "Dear child," said Mercédès, endeavoring in vain to restrain a tear which glistened in the corner of her eye. "Indeed, you only wanted misfortune to change my love for you to admiration. I am not unhappy while I possess my son." "Ah, just so," said Albert. "Here begins the trial. Do you know the decision we have come to, mother? Have we come to any? Yes, it is decided that you are to live at Marseille, and that I am to leave for Africa, where I will earn for myself the right to use the name I now bear instead of the one I have thrown aside." Mercédès sighed. "Well, mother, I yesterday engaged myself as substitute in the spas," added the young man, lowering his eyes with a certain feeling of shame, for even he was unconscious of the sublimity of his self-abasement. "I thought my body was my own, and that I might sell it. I yesterday took the place of another. I sold myself for more than I thought I was worth," he added, attempting to smile. "I fetched 2,000 francs. "Then these 1,000 francs," said Mercédès, shuddering, "are the half of the sum, mother. The other will be paid in a year." Mercédès raised her eyes to heaven with an expression it would be impossible to describe, and tears, which had hitherto been restrained, now yielded to her emotion, and ran down her cheeks. "The price of his blood," she murmured. "Yes, if I am killed," said Albert, laughing. "But I assure you, mother, I have a strong intention of defending my person, and I never felt half so strong an inclination to live as I do now. Merciful heavens! Besides, mother, why should you make up your mind that I am to be killed? Has Lamoricière, that nay of the South, been killed? Has Changarnier been killed? Has Bidault been killed? Has Morel, whom we know, been killed? Think of your joy, mother, when you see me return with an embroidered uniform. I declare, I expect to look magnificent in it, and chose that regiment only from vanity." Mercédès sighed while endeavoring to smile. The devoted mother felt that she ought not to allow the whole weight of the sacrifice to fall upon her son. "Well, now you understand, mother," continued Albert. "Here are more than 4,000 francs settled on you. Upon these you can live at least 2 years. Do you think so?" said Mercédès. These words were uttered in so mournful a tone that their real meaning did not escape Albert. He felt his heart beat, and taking his mother's hand within his own, he said tenderly, "Yes, you will live." "I shall live? Then you will not leave me, Albert." "Mother, I must go," said Albert in a firm, calm voice. "You love me too well to wish me to remain useless and idle with you. Besides, I have signed." You will obey your own wish and the will of heaven. Not my own wish, mother, but reason, necessity. Are we not two despairing creatures? What is life to you? Nothing. What is life to me? Very little without you, mother, for believe me, but for you I should have ceased to live on the day I doubted my father and renounced his name. Well, I will live if you promise me still to hope, and if you grant me the care of your future prospects, you will redouble my strength. Then I will go to the governor of Algeria. He has a royal heart, and is essentially a soldier. I will tell him my gloomy story. I will beg him to turn his eyes now and then towards me, and if he keep his word and interest himself for me, in 6 months I shall be an officer, or dead. If I am an officer, your fortune is certain, for I shall have money enough for both, and moreover a name we shall both be proud of, since it will be our own. If I am killed, well then, mother, you can also die, and there will be an end of our misfortunes. It is well, replied Mercédès with her eloquent glance. You are right, my love. Let us prove to those who are watching our actions that we are worthy of compassion. But let us not yield to gloomy apprehensions, said the young man. I assure you we are, or rather we shall be, very happy. You are a woman at once full of spirit and resignation. I have become simple in my tastes, and am without passion, I hope. Once in service, I shall be rich. Once in Med Dante's house, you will be at rest. Let us strive, I beseech you. Let us strive to be cheerful. Yes, let us strive, for you ought to live and to be happy, Albert. And so our division is made, mother, said the young man, affecting ease of mind. We can now part. Come, I shall engage your passage. And you, my dear boy? I shall stay here for a few days longer. We must accustom ourselves to parting. I want recommendations and some information relative to Africa. I will join you again at Marseille. Well, be it so, let us part, said Mercédès, folding around her shoulders the only shawl she had taken away, and which accidentally happened to be a valuable black cashmere. Albert gathered up his papers hastily, rang the bell to pay the 30 francs he owed to the landlord, and offering his arm to his mother, they descended the stairs. Someone was walking down before them, and this person, hearing the rustling of a silk dress, turned around. "Debray?" muttered Albert. "You, Morcerf?" replied the secretary, resting on the stairs. Curiosity had vanquished the desire of preserving his incognito, and he was recognized. It was indeed strange in this unknown spot to find the young man whose misfortunes had made so much noise in Paris. "Morcerf!" repeated Debray. Then noticing in the dim light the still youthful and veiled figure of Madame de Morcerf, "Pardon me," he added with a smile. "I leave you, Albert." Albert understood his thoughts. "Mother," he said, turning towards Mercédès, "this is M. Debray, secretary of the Minister for the Interior, once a friend of mine." "How once?" stammered Debray. "What do you mean?" "I say so, Miss Debray, because I have no friends now, and I ought not to have any. I thank you for having recognized me, sir." Debray stepped forward and cordially pressed the hand of his interlocutor. "Believe me, dear Albert," he said, with all the emotion he was capable of feeling. "Believe me, I feel deeply for your misfortunes, and if in any way I can serve you, I am yours." "Thank you, sir," said Albert, smiling. "In the midst of our misfortunes, we are still rich enough not to require assistance from anyone. We are leaving Paris, and when our journey is paid, we shall have 5,000 francs left." The blood mounted to the temples of Debray, who held 1,000,000 in his pocketbook, and unimaginative as he was, he could not help reflecting that the same house had contained 2 women, one of whom, justly dishonored, had left it poor with 1,500,000 francs under her cloak, while the other, unjustly stricken but sublime in her misfortune, was yet rich with a few deniers. This parallel disturbed his usual politeness. The philosophy he witnessed appalled him. He muttered a few words of general civility and ran downstairs. That day the minister's clerks and the subordinates had a great deal to put up with from his ill humor. But that same night he found himself the possessor of a fine house, situated on the Boulevard de la Madeleine, and an income of 50,000 livres. The next day, just as Debray was signing the deed, that is about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Madame de Morcerf, after having affectionately embraced her son, entered the coupé of the diligence, which closed upon her. A man was hidden in Laffitte's banking house, behind one of the little arched windows which are placed above each desk. He saw Mercedes enter the diligence, and he also saw Albert withdraw. Then he passed his hand across his forehead, which was clouded with doubt. "Alas," he exclaimed, "how can I restore the happiness I have taken away from these poor innocent creatures? God help me!" Chapter 107. The Lion's Den. One division of La Force in which the most dangerous and desperate prisoners are confined is called the Court of St. Bernard. The prisoners, in their expressive language, have named it the Lion's Den, probably because the captives possess teeth which frequently gnaw the bars, and sometimes the keepers also. It is a prison within a prison. The walls are double the thickness of the rest. The gratings are every day carefully examined by jailers, whose Herculean proportions and cold, pitiless expression prove them to have been chosen to reign over their subjects for their superior activity and intelligence. The courtyard of this quarter is enclosed by enormous walls, over which the sun glances obliquely, when it deigns to penetrate into this gulf of moral and physical deformity. On this paved yard are to be seen, pacing to and fro from morning till night, pale, careworn, and haggard, like so many shadows, the men whom justice holds beneath the steel she is sharpening. There, crouched against the side of the wall which attracts and retains the most heat, they may be seen sometimes talking to one another, but more frequently alone, watching the door, which sometimes opens to call forth one from the gloomy assemblage, or to throw in another outcast from society. The Court of St. Bernard has its own particular apartment for the reception of guests. It is a long rectangle, divided by two upright gratings placed at a distance of 3 feet from one another, to prevent a visitor from shaking hands with or passing anything to the prisoners. It is a wretched, damp, nay, even horrible spot, more especially when we consider the agonizing conferences which have taken place between those iron bars. And yet, frightful though this spot may be, it is looked upon as a kind of paradise by the men whose days are numbered. It is so rare for them to leave the Lion's Den for any other place than the Barrier Saint-Jacques, the galleys, or solitary confinement. In the court which we have attempted to describe and from which a damp vapor was rising, a young man with his hands in his pockets, who had excited much curiosity among the inhabitants of the den, might be seen walking. The cut of his clothes would have made him pass for an elegant man, if those clothes had not been torn to shreds. Still they did not show signs of wear, and the fine cloth, beneath the careful hands of the prisoner, soon recovered its gloss in the parts which were still perfect, for the wearer tried his best to make it assume the appearance of a new coat. He bestowed the same attention upon the cambric front of a shirt, which had considerably changed in color since his entrance into the prison, and he polished his varnished boots with the corner of a handkerchief embroidered with initials surmounted by a coronet. Some of the inmates of the Lion's Den were watching the operations of the prisoner's toilet with considerable interest. "See, the prince is pluming himself," said one of the thieves. "He's a fine-looking fellow," said another. "If he had only a comb and hair grease, he'd take the shine off the gentleman in white kids. His coat looks nearly new, and his boots are brilliant. It is pleasant to have such well-dressed brethren, and those gendarmes behaved shamefully. What jealousy, to tear such clothes!" "He looks like a big bug," said another. "Dresses in fine style, and then to be here so young! Oh, what larks!" Meanwhile, the object of this hideous admiration approached the wicket, against which one of the keepers was leaning. "Come, sir," he said, "lend me 20 francs. You will soon be paid. You run no risks with me. Remember, I have relations who possess more millions than you have deniers. Come. I beseech you, lend me 20 francs, so that I may buy a dressing gown. It is intolerable always to be in a coat and boots. And what a coat, sir, for a prince of the Cavalcanti!" The keeper turned his back and shrugged his shoulders. He did not even laugh at what would have caused anyone else to do so. He had heard so many utter the same things. Indeed, he heard nothing else. "Come," said Andrea, "you are a man void of compassion. I'll have you turned out." This made the keeper turn around, and he burst into a loud laugh. The prisoners then approached and formed a circle. "I tell you that with that wretched sum," continued Andrea, "I could obtain a coat and a room in which to receive the illustrious visitor I am daily expecting." Of course," said the prisoners. Anyone can see he's a gentleman." "Well then, lend him the 20 francs, said the keeper, leaning on the other shoulder. "Surely you will not refuse a comrade." "I am no comrade of these people," said the young man proudly. "You have no right to insult me thus." The thieves looked at one another with low murmurs, and a storm gathered over the head of the aristocratic prisoner, raised less by his own words than by the manner of the keeper. The latter, sure of quelling the tempest when the waves became too violent, allowed them to rise to a certain pitch that he might be revenged on the importunate Andrea, and besides it would afford him some recreation during the long day. The thieves had already approached Andrea, some screaming, "La savate! La savate!" a cruel operation which consists in cuffing a comrade who may have fallen into disgrace, not with an old shoe but with an iron-heeled one. Others proposed the anguille, another kind of recreation, in which a handkerchief is filled with sand, pebbles, and 2 sous pieces, when they have them, which the wretches beat like a flail over the head and shoulders of the unhappy sufferer. "Let us horsewhip the fine gentleman," said others. But Andrea, turning towards them, winked his eyes, rolled his tongue around his cheeks, and smacked his lips in a manner equivalent to 100 words among the bandits when forced to be silent. It was a Masonic sign Caderousse had taught him. He was immediately recognized as one of them. The handkerchief was thrown down, and the iron-heeled shoe replaced on the foot of the wretch to whom it belonged. Some voices were heard to say that the gentleman was right, that he intended to be civil in his way, and that they would set the example of liberty of conscience. And the mob retired. The keeper was so stupefied at this scene that he took Andrea by the hands and began examining his person, attributing the sudden submission of the inmates of the lion's den to something more substantial than mere fascination. Andrea made no resistance, although he protested against it. Suddenly a voice was heard at the wicket. "Benedetto!" exclaimed an inspector. The keeper relaxed his hold. "I am called," said Andrea. "To the visitors' room," said the same voice. "You see someone pays me a visit. Ah, my dear sir, you will see whether a Cavalcanti is to be treated like a common person." And Andrea, gliding through the court like a black shadow, rushed out through the wicket, leaving his comrades, and even the keeper, lost in wonder. Certainly a call to the visitors' room had scarcely astonished Andrea less than themselves, for the wily youth, instead of making use of his privilege of waiting to be claimed on his entry into La Force, had maintained a rigid silence. "Everything," he said, "proves me to be under the protection of some powerful person. This sudden fortune, the facility with which I have overcome all obstacles, an unexpected family and an illustrious name awarded to me, gold showered down upon me, and the most splendid alliances about to be entered into. An unhappy lapse of fortune and the absence of my protector have cast me down, certainly, but not forever. The hand which has retreated for a while will be again stretched forth to save me at the very moment when I shall think myself sinking into the abyss. Why should I risk an imprudent step? It might alienate my protector. He has 2 means of extricating me from this dilemma, the one by a mysterious escape, managed through bribery, the other by buying off my judges with gold. I will say and do nothing until I am convinced that he has quite abandoned me, and then—" Andrea had formed a plan which was tolerably clever. The unfortunate youth was intrepid in the attack and rude in the defense. He had borne with the public prison and with privations of all sorts. Still, by degrees nature, or rather custom, had prevailed, and he suffered from being naked, dirty, and hungry. It was at this moment of discomfort that the inspector's voice called him to the visiting room. Andrea felt his heart leap with joy. It was too soon for a visit from the examining magistrate, and too late for one from the director of the prison or the doctor. It must then be the visitor he hoped for. Behind the grating of the room into which Andrea had been led, he saw, while his eyes dilated with surprise, the dark and intelligent face of M. Bertuccio, who was also gazing with sad astonishment upon the iron bars, the bolted doors, and the shadow which moved behind the other grating. "Ah!" said Andrea, deeply affected. "Good morning, Benedetto," said Bertuccio with his deep, hollow voice. You, said the young man, looking fearfully around him. "Do you not recognize me, unhappy child?" "Silence, be silent," said Andrea, who knew the delicate sense of hearing possessed by the walls, For heaven's sake, do not speak so loud." "You wish to speak with me alone, do you not?" said Bertuccio. "Oh, yes, that is well." And Bertuccio, feeling in his pocket, signed to a keeper whom he saw through the window of the wicket. "Read," he said. "What is that?" asked Andrea. "An order to conduct you to a room, and to leave you there to talk to me." "Oh," cried Andrea, leaping with joy. Then he mentally added, "Still my unknown protector, I am not forgotten. They wish for secrecy, since we are to converse in a private room. I understand Bertuccio has been sent by my protector." The keeper spoke for a moment with an official, then opened the iron gates and conducted Andrea to a room on the first floor. The room was whitewashed, as is the custom in prisons, but it looked quite brilliant to a prisoner, though a stove, a bed, a chair, and a table formed the whole of its sumptuous furniture. Bertuccio sat down upon the chair. Andrea threw himself upon the bed. The keeper retired. "Now," said the steward, "what have you to tell me?" "And you?" said Andrea. "You speak first." "Oh, no, you must have much to tell me, since you have come to seek me." "Well, be it so. You have continued your course of villainy. You have robbed. You have assassinated. Well, I should say, if you had me taken to a private room only to tell me this, you might have saved yourself the trouble. I know all these things, but there are some with which, on the contrary, I am not acquainted. Let us talk of those, if you please. Who sent you?" "Come, come, you are going on quickly, Ems Benedetto." "Yes, and to the point. Let us dispense with useless words. Who sends you?" "How did you know I was in prison?" "I recognized you some time since as the insolent dandy who so gracefully mounted his horse in the Champs-Élysées." "Oh, the Champs-Élysées? Ah, yes. We burn, as they say at the game of pincette. The Champs-Élysées? Come, let us talk a little about my father." "Who then am I?" "You, sir? You are my adopted father. But it was not you, I presume, who placed at my disposal 100,000 francs, which I spent in 4 or 5 months. It was not you who manufactured an Italian gentleman for my father. It was not you who introduced me into the world, and had me invited to a certain dinner at Auteuil, which I fancy I am eating at this moment, in company with the most distinguished people in Paris, amongst the rest with a certain procureur, whose acquaintance I did very wrong not to cultivate, for he would have been very useful to me just now. It was not you, in fact, who bailed me for 1 or 2 millions, when the fatal discovery of my little secret took place. Come, speak, my worthy Corsican, speak. What do you wish me to say? I will help you. You were speaking of the Champs-Élysées just now, worthy foster father. Well, in the Champs-Élysées there resides a very rich gentleman, at whose house you robbed and murdered, did you not? I believe I did. The Count of Monte Cristo? 'Tis you who have named him, as Mesracine says. Well, am I to rush into his arms, and strain him to my heart, crying, my father, like Monsieur Pixérécourt?" "Do not let us jest," gravely replied Bertuccio, "and dare not to utter that name again as you have pronounced it." "Bah," said Andrea, a little overcome by the solemnity of Bertuccio's manner. "Why not?" "Because the person who bears it is too highly favored by heaven to be the father of such a wretch as you." "Oh, these are fine words." "And there will be fine doings if you do not take care." "Menaces, I do not fear them, I will say." "Do you think you are engaged with a pygmy like yourself?" said Bertuccio in so calm a tone, and with so steadfast a look, that Andrea was moved to the very soul. "Do you think you have to do with galley slaves or novices in the world? Benedetto, you are fallen into terrible hands. They are ready to open for you. Make use of them. Do not play with the thunderbolt they have laid aside for a moment, but which they can take up again instantly if you attempt to intercept their movements." "My father? I will know who my father is," said the obstinate youth. "I will perish if I must, but I will know it. What does scandal signify to me? What possessions, what reputation, what pull, as Beauchamp says, have I? You great people always lose something by scandal, notwithstanding your millions. Come, who is my father? I came to tell you." "Ah," cried Benedetto, his eyes sparkling with joy. Just then the door opened, and the jailer, addressing himself to Bertuccio, said, "Excuse me, sir, but the examining magistrate is waiting for the prisoner." "And so closes our interview," said Andrea to the worthy steward. "I wish the troublesome fellow were at the devil." "I will return tomorrow," said Bertuccio. "Good! Gendarmes, I am at your service." Ah, sir, do leave a few crowns for me at the gate, that I may have some things I am in need of." "It shall be done," replied Bertuccio. Andrea extended his hand. Bertuccio kept his own in his pocket and merely jingled a few pieces of money. "That's what I mean," said Andrea, endeavoring to smile, quite overcome by the strange tranquility of Bertuccio. "Can I be deceived?" he murmured, as he stepped into the oblong and grated vehicle which they call the salad basket. "Never mind, we shall see. Tomorrow, then," he added, turning towards Bertuccio. "Tomorrow," replied the steward. Chapter 108. The Judge. We remember that the Abbé Busoni remained alone with Noirtier in the chamber of death, and that the old man and the priest were the sole guardians of the young girl's body. Perhaps it was the Christian exhortations of the abbé, perhaps his kind charity, perhaps his persuasive words, which had restored the courage of Noirtier, for ever since he had conversed with the priest, his violent despair had yielded to a calm resignation which surprised all who knew his excessive affection for Valentine. M. de Villefort had not seen his father since the morning of the death. The whole establishment had been changed. Another valet was engaged for himself, a new servant for Noirtier, 2 women had entered Madame de Villefort's service. In fact, everywhere, to the concierge and coachman, new faces were presented to the different masters of the house, thus widening the division which had always existed between the members of the same family. The Assizes also were about to begin, and Villefort, shut up in his room, exerted himself with feverish anxiety in drawing up the case against the murderer of Caderousse. This affair, like all those in which the Count of Monte Cristo had interfered, caused a great sensation in Paris. The proofs were certainly not convincing, since they rested upon a few words written by an escaped galley slave on his deathbed, and who might have been actuated by hatred or revenge in accusing his companion. But the mind of the procureur was made up. He felt assured that Benedetto was guilty, and he hoped by his skill in conducting this aggravated case to flatter his self-love, which was about the only vulnerable point left in his frozen heart. The case was therefore prepared owing to the incessant labor of Villefort, who wished it to be the first on the list in the coming Assizes. He had been obliged to seclude himself more than ever, to evade the enormous number of applications presented to him for the purpose of obtaining tickets of admission to the court on the day of trial. And then so short a time had elapsed since the death of poor Valentine, and the gloom which overshadowed the house was so recent, that no one wondered to see the father so absorbed in his professional duties, which were the only means he had of dissipating his grief. Once only had Villefort seen his father. It was the day after that upon which Bertuccio had paid his second visit to Benedetto, when the latter was to learn his father's name. The magistrate, harassed and fatigued, had descended to the garden of his house, and in a gloomy mood, similar to that in which Tarquin lopped off the tallest poppies, he began knocking off with his cane the long and dying branches of the rose trees, which, placed along the avenue, seemed like the specters of the brilliant flowers which had bloomed in the past season. More than once he had reached that part of the garden where the famous boarded gate stood overlooking the deserted enclosure, always returning by the same path to begin his walk again, at the same pace and with the same gesture, when he accidentally turned his eyes towards the house, whence he heard the noisy play of his son, who had returned from school to spend the Sunday and Monday with his mother. While doing so, he observed Noirtier at one of the open windows, where the old man had been placed that he might enjoy the last rays of the sun which yet yielded some heat, and was now shining upon the dying flowers and red leaves of the creeper which twined around the balcony. The eye of the old man was riveted upon a spot which Villefort could scarcely distinguish. His glance was so full of hate, of ferocity, and savage impatience, that Villefort turned out of the path he had been pursuing, to see upon what person this dark look was directed. Then he saw beneath a thick clump of linden trees, which were nearly divested of foliage, Madame de Villefort sitting with a book in her hand, the perusal of which she frequently interrupted to smile upon her son, or to throw back his elastic ball, which he obstinately threw from the drawing-room into the garden. Villefort became pale. He understood the old man's meaning. Noirtier continued to look at the same object, but suddenly his glance was transferred from the wife to the husband, and Villefort himself had to submit to the searching investigation of eyes, which, while changing their direction and even their language, had lost none of their menacing expression. Madame de Villefort, unconscious of the passions that exhausted their fire over her head, at that moment held her son's ball and was making signs to him to reclaim it with a kiss. Edward begged for a long while, the maternal kiss probably not offering sufficient recompense for the trouble he must take to obtain it. However, at length he decided, leaped out of the window into a cluster of heliotropes and daisies, and ran to his mother, his forehead streaming with perspiration. Madame de Villefort wiped his forehead, pressed her lips upon it, and sent him back with the ball in one hand and some bonbons in the other. Villefort, drawn by an irresistible attraction, like that of the bird to the serpent, walked towards the house. As he approached it, Noirtier's gaze followed him, and his eyes appeared of such a fiery brightness that Villefort felt them pierce to the depths of his heart. In that earnest look might be read a deep reproach, as well as a terrible menace. Then Noirtier raised his eyes to heaven, as though to remind his son of a forgotten oath. "It is well, sir," replied Villefort from below. "It is well. Have patience, but one day longer. What I have said I will do." Noirtier seemed to be calmed by these words, and turned his eyes with indifference to the other side. Villefort violently unbuttoned his greatcoat, which seemed to strangle him, and passing his livid hand across his forehead, entered his study. The night was cold and still. The family had all retired to rest, but Villefort, who alone remained up, and worked till 5 o'clock in the morning, reviewing the last interrogatories made the night before by the examining magistrates, compiling the depositions of the witnesses, and putting the finishing stroke to the deed of accusation, which was one of the most energetic and best conceived of any he had yet delivered. The next day, Monday, was the first sitting of the Assizes. The morning dawned dull and gloomy, and Villefort saw the dim gray light shine upon the lines he had traced in red ink. The magistrate had slept for a short time while the lamp sent forth its final struggles. Its flickerings awoke him, and he found his fingers as damp and purple as though they had been dipped in blood. He opened the window. A bright yellow streak crossed the sky and seemed to divide in half the poplars, which stood out in black relief on the horizon. In the clover fields beyond the chestnut trees, a lark was mounting up to heaven, while pouring out her clear morning song. The damps of the dew bathed the head of Villefort, and refreshed his memory. "Today," he said with an effort, "today the man who holds the blade of justice must strike wherever there is guilt." Involuntarily his eyes wandered towards the window of Noirtier's room, where he had seen him the preceding night. The curtain was drawn, and yet the image of his father was so vivid to his mind that he addressed the closed window as though it had been open, and as if through the opening he had beheld the menacing old man. "Yes," he murmured, "yes, be satisfied." His head dropped upon his chest, and in this position he paced his study. Then he threw himself, dressed as he was, upon a sofa, less to sleep than to rest his limbs, cramped with cold and study. By degrees everyone awoke. Villefort from his study heard the successive noises which accompany the life of a house, the opening and shutting of doors, the ringing of Madame de Villefort's bell to summon the waiting maid, mingled with the first shouts of the child who rose full of the enjoyment of his age. Villefort also rang. His new valet brought him the papers, and with them a cup of chocolate. "What are you bringing me?" said he. "A cup of chocolate." "I did not ask for it. Who has paid me this attention?" "My mistress, sir. She said you would have to speak a great deal in the murder case, and that you should take something to keep up your strength." And the valet placed the cup on the table nearest to the sofa, which was, like all the rest, covered with papers. The valet then left the room. Villefort looked for an instant with a gloomy expression. Then, suddenly, taking it up with a nervous motion, he swallowed its contents at one draught. It might have been thought that he hoped the beverage would be mortal, and that he sought for death to deliver him from a duty which he would rather die than fulfill. He then rose and paced his room with a smile it would have been terrible to witness. The chocolate was inoffensive, for Villefort felt no effects. The breakfast hour arrived, but Madame de Villefort was not at table. The valet re-entered. "Madame de Villefort wishes to remind you, sir," he said, "that 11 o'clock has just struck, and that the trial commences at 12. "Well?" said Villefort. "What then?" "Madame de Villefort is dressed. She is quite ready, and wishes to know if she is to accompany you, sir." "Where to?" "To the Palais. What to do?" "My mistress wishes much to be present at the trial." "Ah," said Villefort with a startling accent. "Does she wish that?" The servant drew back and said, "If you wish to go alone, sir, I will go and tell my mistress." Villefort remained silent for a moment and dented his pale cheeks with his nails. "Tell your mistress," he at length answered, "that I wish to speak to her, and I beg she will wait for me in her own room." "Yes, sir." "Then come to dress and shave me." "Directly, sir." The valet reappeared almost instantly, and having shaved his master, assisted him to dress entirely in black. When he had finished, he said, "My mistress said she should expect you, sir, as soon as you had finished dressing." "I am going to her." And Villefort, with his papers under his arm and hat in hand, directed his steps toward the apartment of his wife. At the door he paused for a moment to wipe his damp, pale brow. He then entered the room. Madame de Villefort was sitting on an ottoman and impatiently turning over the leaves of some newspapers and pamphlets which young Edward, by way of amusing himself, was tearing to pieces before his mother could finish reading them. She was dressed to go out. Her bonnet was placed beside her on a chair, and her gloves were on her hands. "Ah, here you are, monsieur," she said in her naturally calm voice. "But how pale you are! Have you been working all night? Why did you not come down to breakfast? Well, will you take me, or shall I take Edward?" Madame de Villefort had multiplied her questions in order to gain one answer, but to all her inquiries Madame de Villefort remained mute and cold as a statue. "Edward," said Villefort, fixing an imperious glance on the child, "go and play in the drawing-room, my dear. I wish to speak to your mamma." Madame de Villefort shuddered at the sight of that cold countenance, that resolute tone, and the awfully strange preliminaries. Edward raised his head, looked at his mother, and then, finding that she did not confirm the order, began cutting off the heads of his leaden soldiers. "Edward," cried Madame de Villefort, so harshly that the child started up from the floor, "do you hear me? Go!" The child, unaccustomed to such treatment, arose, pale and trembling. It would be difficult to say whether his emotion were caused by fear or passion. His father went up to him, took him in his arms, and kissed his forehead. "Go," he said. "Go, my child." Edward ran out. Madame de Villefort went to the door, which he closed behind the child, and bolted. "Dear me," said the young woman, endeavoring to read her husband's inmost thoughts, while a smile passed over her countenance which froze the impassibility of Villefort. "What is the matter?" "Madame, where do you keep the poison you generally use?" said the magistrate, without any introduction, placing himself between his wife and the door. Madame de Villefort must have experienced something of the sensation of a bird which, looking up, sees the murderous trap closing over its head. A hoarse, broken tone, which was neither a cry nor a sigh, escaped from her while she became deadly pale. "Monsieur," she said, "I do not understand you." And in her first paroxysm of terror, she had raised herself from the sofa. In the next, stronger very likely than the other, she fell down again on the cushions. "I asked you," continued Villefort in a perfectly calm tone, "where you conceal the poison by the aid of which you have killed my father-in-law, Mame de Saint-Méran, my mother-in-law, Madame de Saint-Méran Barrois, and my daughter Valentine." "Ah, sir," exclaimed Madame de Villefort, clasping her hands, "what do you say? It is not for you to interrogate, but to answer." "Is it to the judge or to the husband?" stammered Madame de Villefort. To the judge, madame." It was terrible to behold the frightful pallor of that woman, the anguish of her look, the trembling of her whole frame. "Ah, sir," she muttered, "ah, sir," and this was all. "You do not answer, madame," exclaimed the terrible interrogator. Then he added with a smile yet more terrible than his anger, "It is true, then. You do not deny it." She moved forward. "And you cannot deny it," added Villefort, extending his hand toward her, as though to seize her in the name of justice. "You have accomplished these different crimes with impudent address, but which could only deceive those whose affections for you blinded them. Since the death of Madame de Saint-Méran, I have known that a poisoner lived in my house. M. d'Avrigny warned me of it. After the death of Barrois, my suspicions were directed towards an angel. Those suspicions which, even when there is no crime, are always alive in my heart. But after the death of Valentine, there has been no doubt in my mind, madame, and not only in mine, but in those of others. Thus your crime, known by two persons, suspected by many, will soon become public, and as I told you just now, you no longer speak to the husband, but to the judge." The young woman hid her face in her hands. "Oh, sir," she stammered, "I beseech you, do not believe appearances." "Are you then a coward?" cried Villefort in a contemptuous voice. "But I have always observed that poisoners were cowards. Can you be a coward, you, who have had the courage to witness the death of two old men and a young girl murdered by you?" Sir, can you be a coward?" continued Villefort with increasing excitement. "You who could count one by one the minutes of 4 death agonies. You who have arranged your infernal plans and removed the beverages with a talent and precision almost miraculous? Have you, then, who have calculated everything with such nicety, have you forgotten to calculate one thing? I mean, where the revelation of your crimes will lead you to? Oh, it is impossible. You must have saved some surer, more subtle and deadly poison than any other, that you might escape the punishment that you deserve. You have done this, I hope so at least." Madame de Villefort stretched out her hands and fell on her knees. "I understand," he said, "you confess, but a confession made to the judges, a confession made at the last moment, extorted when the crime cannot be denied, diminishes not the punishment inflicted on the guilty." "The punishment?" exclaimed Madame de Villefort. "The punishment, monsieur? Twice you have pronounced that word." "Certainly. Did you hope to escape it because you were 4 times guilty? Did you think the punishment would be withheld because you are the wife of him who pronounces it? No, madame, no. The scaffold awaits the poisoner, whoever she may be, unless, as I just said, the poisoner has taken the precaution of keeping for herself a few drops of her deadliest poison." Madame de Villefort uttered a wild cry, and a hideous and uncontrollable terror spread over her distorted features. "Oh, do not fear the scaffold, madam," said the magistrate. "I will not dishonor you, since that would be dishonor to myself. No, if you have heard me distinctly, you will understand that you are not to die on the scaffold." "No, I do not understand. What do you mean?" stammered the unhappy woman, completely overwhelmed. "I mean that the wife of the first magistrate in the capital shall not, by her infamy, soil an unblemished name, that she shall not, with one blow, dishonor her husband and her child." "No, oh no. Well, madame, it will be a laudable action on your part, and I will thank you for it." "You will thank me for what? For what you have just said." "What did I say? Oh, my brain whirls. I no longer understand anything. Oh, my God, my God!" And she rose, with her hair disheveled and her lips foaming. "Have you answered the question I put to you on entering the room? Where do you keep the poison you generally use, madame?" Madame de Villefort raised her arms to heaven and convulsively struck one hand against the other. No, she vociferated. "No, you cannot wish that." "What I do not wish, madame, is that you should perish on the scaffold. Do you understand?" asked Villefort. "Oh, mercy, monsieur. What I require is that justice be done. I am on the earth to punish, madame," he added with a flaming glance. "Any other woman, were it the queen herself, I would send to the executioner. But to you I shall be merciful. To you I will say, have you not, madame, put aside some of the surest, deadliest, most speedy poison?" "Oh, pardon me, sir, let me live." "She is cowardly," said Villefort. "Reflect that I am your wife. You are a poisoner. In the name of heaven. No. In the name of the love you once bore me. No. In the name of our child. Ah, for the sake of our child, let me live. No, I tell you. One day, if I allow you to live, you will perhaps kill him, as you have the others." "I kill my boy?" cried the distracted mother, rushing toward Villefort. "I kill my son? Ha!" And a frightful, demoniac laugh finished the sentence, which was lost in a hoarse rattle. Madame de Villefort fell at her husband's feet. He approached her. "Think of it, madame," he said. "If on my return justice has not been satisfied, I will denounce you with my own mouth and arrest you with my own hands." She listened, panting, overwhelmed, crushed. Her eye alone lived and glared horribly. "Do you understand me?" he said. I am going down there to pronounce the sentence of death against a murderer. If I find you alive on my return, you shall sleep tonight in the conciergerie." Madame de Villefort sighed. Her nerves gave way, and she sunk on the carpet. The king's attorney seemed to experience a sensation of pity. He looked upon her less severely, and, bowing to her, said slowly, "Farewell, madam, farewell." That farewell struck Madame de Villefort like the executioner's knife. She fainted. The procureur went out, after having double-locked the door. Chapter 109. The Assizes. The Benedetto affair, as it was called at the Palais and by people in general, had produced a tremendous sensation. Frequenting the Café de Paris, the Boulevard de Gand, and the Bois de Boulogne, during his brief career of splendor, the false Cavalcanti had formed a host of acquaintances. The papers had related his various adventures, both as the man of fashion and the galley slave. And as everyone who had been personally acquainted with Prince Andrea Cavalcanti experienced a lively curiosity in his fate, they all determined to spare no trouble in endeavoring to witness the trial of M. Benedetto for the murder of his comrade in chains. In the eyes of many, Benedetto appeared, if not a victim to, at least an instance of, the fallibility of the law. M. Cavalcanti, his father, had been seen in Paris, and it was expected that he would reappear to claim the illustrious outcast. Many, also, who were not aware of the circumstances attending his withdrawal from Paris, were struck with the worthy appearance, the gentlemanly bearing, and the knowledge of the world displayed by the old patrician, who certainly played the nobleman very well, so long as he said nothing, and made no arithmetical calculations. As for the accused himself, many remembered him as being so amiable, so handsome, and so liberal, that they chose to think him the victim of some conspiracy, since in this world large fortunes frequently excite the malevolence and jealousy of some unknown enemy. Everyone, therefore, ran to the court, some to witness the sight, others to comment upon it. From 7 o'clock in the morning, a crowd was stationed at the iron gates, and an hour before the trial commenced, the hall was full of the privileged. Before the entrance of the magistrates, and indeed frequently afterwards, a court of justice, on days when some especial trial is to take place, resembles a drawing-room where many persons recognize each other and converse if they can do so without losing their seats, or, if they are separated by too great a number of lawyers, communicate by signs. It was one of the magnificent autumn days which make amends for a short summer. The clouds which M. de Villefort had perceived at sunrise had all disappeared as if by magic, and one of the softest and most brilliant days of September shone forth in all its splendor. Beauchamp, one of the kings of the press, and therefore claiming the right of a throne everywhere, was eyeing everybody through his monocle. He perceived Château Renaud and Debray, who had just gained the good graces of a sergeant-at-arms, and who had persuaded the latter to let them stand before, instead of behind him, as they ought to have done. The worthy sergeant had recognized the minister's secretary and the millionaire, and by way of paying extra attention to his noble neighbors, promised to keep their places while they paid a visit to Beauchamp. "Well," said Beauchamp, "we shall see our friend." "Yes, indeed," replied Debray. "That worthy prince? Deuce take those Italian princes! A man, too, who could boast of Dante for a genealogist, and could reckon back to the Divina Commedia." "A nobility of the rope," said Château Renaud phlegmatically. "He will be condemned, will he not?" asked Debray of Beauchamp. "My dear fellow, I think we should ask you that question. You know such news much better than we do. Did you see the president at the minister's last night?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "Something which will surprise you." "Oh, make haste and tell me, then. It is a long time since that has happened." "Well, he told me that Benedetto, who is considered a serpent of subtlety and a giant of cunning, is really but a very commonplace, silly rascal, and altogether unworthy of the experiments that will be made on his phrenological organs after his death." "Bah!" said Beauchamp. "He played the prince very well." "Yes, for you who detest those unhappy princes, Beauchamp, and are always delighted to find fault with them, but not for me, who discover a gentleman by instinct, and who scent out an aristocratic family like a very bloodhound of heraldry." "Then you never believed in the principality?" "Yes, in the principality, but not in the prince." "Not so bad," said Beauchamp. Still, I assure you, he passed very well with many people. I saw him at the ministers' houses." "Ah, yes," said Chateau Renaud. "The idea of thinking ministers understand anything about princes." "There is something in what you have just said," said Beauchamp, laughing. "But," said Debray to Beauchamp, "if I spoke to the president, you must have been with the procureur." "It was an impossibility. For the last week M. de Villefort has secluded himself. It is natural enough, this strange chain of domestic afflictions, followed by the no less strange death of his daughter." "Strange? What do you mean, Beauchamp?" "Oh yes, do you pretend that all this has been unobserved at the minister's?" said Beauchamp, placing his eyeglass in his eye where he tried to make it remain. "My dear sir," said Chateau Renaud, "allow me to tell you that you do not understand that maneuver with the eyeglass half so well as Debray. Give him a lesson, Debray." "Stay," said Beauchamp, "surely I am not deceived." "What is it?" "It is she." "Whom do you mean?" "They said she had left." "Mademoiselle Eugénie?" said Chateau Renaud. "Has she returned?" "No, but her mother." "Madame Danglars? Nonsense! Impossible," said Chateau Renaud. "Only 10 days after the flight of her daughter, and 3 days from the bankruptcy of her husband?" Debray colored slightly, and followed with his eyes the direction of Beauchamp's glance. "Come," he said, "it is only a veiled lady, some foreign princess, perhaps the mother of Cavalcanti. But you were just speaking on a very interesting topic, Beauchamp." "I?" "Yes, you were telling us about the extraordinary death of Valentine." "Ah, yes, so I was. But how is it that Madame de Villefort is not here?" "Poor dear woman," said Debray. "She is no doubt occupied in distilling balm for the hospitals, or in making cosmetics for herself or friends. Do you know she spends 2,000 or 3,000 crowns a year in this amusement? But I wonder she is not here. I should have been pleased to see her, for I like her very much." "And I hate her," said Chateau Renaud. "Why? I do not know. Why do we love? Why do we hate? I detest her from antipathy. Or rather by instinct." "Perhaps so. But to return to what you were saying, Beauchamp. Well, do you know why they die so multitudinously at M. de Villefort's?" "Multitudinously is good," said Chateau Renaud. "My good fellow, you'll find the word in Saint-Simon. But the thing itself is at M. de Villefort's. But let's get back to the subject." "Talking of that," said Debray, "Madame was making inquiries about that house, which for the last 3 months has been hung with black." "Who is Madame?" asked Chateau Renaud. "The minister's wife, pardieu." "Oh, your pardon? I never visit ministers. I leave that to the princes." "Really, you were only before sparkling, but now you are brilliant. Take compassion on us, or, like Jupiter, you will wither us up." "I will not speak again," said Chateau Renaud. "Pray have compassion upon me, and do not take up every word I say. Come, let us endeavor to get to the end of our story. Beauchamp, I told you that yesterday Madame made inquiries of me upon the subject. Enlighten me, and I will then communicate my information to her." "Well, gentlemen, the reason people die so multitudinously, I like the word, at M. de Villefort's is that there is an assassin in the house." The 2 young men shuddered, for the same idea had more than once occurred to them. "And who is the assassin?" they asked together. "Young Edward." A burst of laughter from the auditors did not in the least disconcert the speaker, who continued, "Yes, gentlemen, Edward, the infant phenomenon, who is quite an adept in the art of killing." "You are jesting." "Not at all. I yesterday engaged a servant who had just left a Villefort. I intend sending him away tomorrow, for he eats so enormously, to make up for the fast imposed upon him by his terror in that house. Well, now listen." "We are listening." "It appears the dear child has obtained possession of a bottle containing some drug, which he every now and then uses against those who have displeased him. First, M. and Madame de Saint-Méran incurred his displeasure, so he poured out 3 drops of his elixir. 3 drops were sufficient. Then followed Barrois, the old servant of Monsieur Noirtier, who sometimes rebuffed this little wretch. He therefore received the same quantity of the elixir. The same happened to Valentine, of whom he was jealous. He gave her the same dose as the others, and all was over for her as well as the rest." "Why, what nonsense are you telling us?" said Chateau Renaud. "Yes, it is an extraordinary story," said Beauchamp. "Is it not?" "It is absurd," said Debray. "Ah," said Beauchamp, "you doubt me? Well, you can ask my servant, or rather him who will no longer be my servant tomorrow. It was the talk of the house." And this elixir, where is it? What is it? The child conceals it. But where did he find it? In his mother's laboratory. Does his mother then keep poisons in her laboratory? How can I tell? You are questioning me like a king's attorney. I only repeat what I have been told, and like my informant, I can do no more. The poor devil would eat nothing from fear. It is incredible. No, my dear fellow, it is not at all incredible. You saw the child pass through the Rue Richelieu last year, who amused himself with killing his brothers and sisters by sticking pins in their ears while they slept. The generation who follow us are very precocious. Come, Beauchamp, said Chateau Renaud, I will bet anything you do not believe a word of all you have been telling us, but I do not see the Count of Monte Cristo here. He is worn out, said Debray. Besides, he could not well appear in public, since he has been the dupe of the Cavalcanti, who, it appears, presented themselves to him with false letters of credit, and cheated him out of 100,000 francs upon the hypothesis of this principality. By the way, M. de Chateau Renaud, asked Beauchamp, how is Morel? Ma foi, I have called 3 times without once seeing him. Still, his sister did not seem uneasy, and told me that though she had not seen him for 2 or 3 days, she was sure he was well. Ah, now I think of it, the Count of Monte Cristo cannot appear in the hall, said Beauchamp. Why not? Because he is an actor in the drama. Has he assassinated anyone then? No, on the contrary, they wished to assassinate him. You know that it was in leaving his house that M. de Caderousse was murdered by his friend Benedetto. You know that the famous waistcoat was found in his house, containing the letter which stopped the signature of the marriage contract. Do you see the waistcoat? There it is, all blood-stained, on the desk, as a testimony of the crime. Ah, very good. Hush, gentlemen, here is the court. Let us go back to our places. A noise was heard in the hall. The sergeant called his 2 patrons with an energetic hem, and the doorkeeper appearing, called out with that shrill voice peculiar to his order, ever since the days of Beaumarchais, "The court, gentlemen!" Chapter 110. The Indictment. The judges took their places in the midst of the most profound silence. The jury took their seats. M. de Villefort, the object of unusual attention, and we had almost said of general admiration, sat in the armchair and cast a tranquil glance around him. Everyone looked with astonishment on that grave and severe face, whose calm expression personal griefs had been unable to disturb, and the aspect of a man who was a stranger to all human emotions excited something very like terror. "Gendarmes," said the president, "lead in the accused." At these words the public attention became more intense, and all eyes were turned towards the door through which Benedetto was to enter. The door soon opened and the accused appeared. The same impression was experienced by all present, and no one was deceived by the expression of his countenance. His features bore no sign of that deep emotion which stops the beating of the heart and blanches the cheek. His hands, gracefully placed, one upon his hat, the other in the opening of his white waistcoat, were not at all tremulous. His eye was calm and even brilliant. Scarcely had he entered the hall when he glanced at the whole body of magistrates and assistants. His eye rested longer on the president, and still more so on the king's attorney. By the side of Andrea was stationed the lawyer who was to conduct his defense, and who had been appointed by the court, for Andrea disdained to pay any attention to those details, to which he appeared to attach no importance. The lawyer was a young man with light hair, whose face expressed 100 times more emotion than that which characterized the prisoner. The president called for the indictment, revised, as we know, by the clever and implacable pen of Villefort. During the reading of this, which was long, the public attention was continually drawn towards Andrea, who bore the inspection with Spartan unconcern. Villefort had never been so concise and eloquent. The crime was depicted in the most vivid colors. The former life of the prisoner, his transformation, a review of his life from the earliest period, were set forth with all the talent that a knowledge of human life could furnish to a mind like that of the procureur. Benedetto was thus forever condemned in public opinion before the sentence of the law could be pronounced. Andrea paid no attention to the successive charges which were brought against him. M. de Villefort, who examined him attentively and who no doubt practiced upon him all the psychological studies he was accustomed to use, in vain endeavored to make him lower his eyes, notwithstanding the depth and profundity of his gaze. At length, the reading of the indictment was ended. "Accused," said the president, "your name and surname?" Andrea arose. "Excuse me, Mr. President," he said in a clear voice, "but I see you are going to adopt a course of questions through which I cannot follow you. I have an idea, which I will explain by and by, of making an exception to the usual form of accusation. Allow me then, if you please, to answer in different order, or I will not do so at all." The astonished president looked at the jury, who in turn looked at Villefort. The whole assembly manifested great surprise, but Andrea appeared quite unmoved. "Your age?" said the president. "Will you answer that question?" "I will answer that question, as well as the rest, Mr. President, but in its turn." "Your age?" repeated the president. "I am 21 years old, or rather I shall be in a few days, as I was born the night of the 27th of September, 1817. De Villefort, who was busy taking down some notes, raised his head at the mention of this date. "Where were you born?" continued the president. "At Auteuil, near Paris." De Villefort a second time raised his head, looked at Benedetto as if he had been gazing at the head of Medusa, and became livid. As for Benedetto, he gracefully wiped his lips with a fine cambric pocket handkerchief. "Your profession?" "First I was a forger," answered Andrea as calmly as possible. "Then I became a thief, and lately have become an assassin." A murmur, or rather storm, of indignation burst from all parts of the assembly. The judges themselves appeared to be stupefied, and the jury manifested tokens of disgust for a cynicism so unexpected in a man of fashion. And de Villefort pressed his hand upon his brow, which, at first pale, had become red and burning. Then he suddenly arose and looked around as though he had lost his senses. He wanted air. "Are you looking for anything, Mr. Procureur?" asked Benedetto with his most ingratiating smile. And de Villefort answered nothing, but sat, or rather threw himself down again upon his chair. "And now, prisoner, will you consent to tell your name?" said the president. "The brutal affectation with which you have enumerated and classified your crimes calls for a severe reprimand on the part of the court, both in the name of morality and for the respect due to humanity. You appear to consider this a point of honor, and it may be for this reason that you have delayed acknowledging your name. You wished it to be preceded by all these titles. It is quite wonderful, Mr. President, how entirely you have read my thoughts," said Benedetto in his softest voice and most polite manner. "This is indeed the reason why I begged you to alter the order of the questions." The public astonishment had reached its height. There was no longer any deceit or bravado in the manner of the accused. The audience felt that a startling revelation was to follow this ominous prelude. "Well," said the president, "your name?" "I cannot tell you my name, since I do not know it, but I know my father's and can tell it to you." A painful giddiness overwhelmed Villefort. Great drops of acrid sweat fell from his face upon the papers which he held in his convulsed hand. "Repeat your father's name," said the president. Not a whisper, not a breath was heard in that vast assembly. Everyone waited anxiously. "My father is King's attorney," replied Andrea calmly. "King's attorney?" said the president, stupefied, and without noticing the agitation which spread over the face of M. de Villefort. "King's attorney?" "Yes, and if you wish to know his name, I will tell it. He is named Villefort." The explosion, which had been so long restrained from a feeling of respect to the court of justice, now burst forth like thunder from the breasts of all present. The court itself did not seek to restrain the feelings of the audience. The exclamations, the insults addressed to Benedetto, who remained perfectly unconcerned, the energetic gestures, the movement of the gendarmes, the sneers of the scum of the crowd, always sure to rise to the surface in case of any disturbance. All this lasted 5 minutes, before the doorkeepers and magistrates were able to restore silence. In the midst of this tumult, the voice of the president was heard to exclaim, "Are you playing with justice, accused? And do you dare set your fellow citizens an example of disorder which even in these times has never been equaled?" Several persons hurried up to de Villefort, who sat half bowed over in his chair, offering him consolation, encouragement, and protestations of zeal and sympathy. Order was re-established in the hall, except that a few people still moved about and whispered to one another. A lady, it was said, had just fainted. They had supplied her with a smelling bottle, and she had recovered. During the scene of tumult, Andrea had turned his smiling face towards the assembly. Then, leaning with one hand on the oaken rail of the dock, in the most graceful attitude possible, he said, "Gentlemen, I assure you I had no idea of insulting the court or of making a useless disturbance in the presence of this honorable assembly. They ask my age, I tell it. They ask where I was born, I answer. They ask my name, I cannot give it, since my parents abandoned me. But though I cannot give my own name, not possessing one, I can tell them my father's. Now I repeat, my father is named M. de Villefort, and I am ready to prove it." There was an energy, a conviction, and a sincerity in the manner of the young man, which silenced the tumult. All eyes were turned for a moment towards the procureur, who sat as motionless as though a thunderbolt had changed him into a corpse. "Gentlemen," said Andrea, commanding silence by his voice and manner, "I owe you the proofs and explanations of what I have said." "But," said the irritated president, "you called yourself Benedetto, declared yourself an orphan, and claimed Corsica as your country." "I said anything I pleased, in order that the solemn declaration I have just made should not be withheld, which otherwise would certainly have been the case. I now repeat that I was born at Auteuil on the night of the 27th of September, 1817, and that I am the son of the procureur, Monte de Villefort. Do you wish for any further details? I will give them. I was born in number 28, Rue de la Fontaine, in a room hung with red damask. My father took me in his arms, telling my mother I was dead, wrapped me in a napkin marked with an H and an N, and carried me into a garden, where he buried me alive. A shudder ran through the assembly when they saw that the confidence of the prisoner increased in proportion to the terror of M. de Villefort. "But how have you become acquainted with all these details?" asked the president. "I will tell you, Mr. President. A man who had sworn vengeance against my father and had long watched his opportunity to kill him, had introduced himself that night into the garden in which my father buried me. He was concealed in a thicket. He saw my father bury something in the ground and stabbed him. Then, thinking the deposit might contain some treasure, he turned up the ground and found me still living. The man carried me to the Foundling Asylum, where I was registered under the number 37. 3 months afterwards, a woman traveled from Rogliano to Paris to fetch me, and having claimed me as her son, carried me away. Thus, you see, though born in Paris, I was brought up in Corsica." There was a moment's silence, during which one could have fancied the hall empty, so profound was the stillness. "Proceed," said the president. "Certainly, I might have lived happily amongst those good people who adored me, but my perverse disposition prevailed over the virtues which my adopted mother endeavored to instill into my heart. I increased in wickedness till I committed crime. One day when I cursed Providence for making me so wicked, and ordaining me to such a fate, my adopted father said to me, 'Do not blaspheme, unhappy child. The crime is that of your father, not yours, of your father, who consigned you to hell if you died, and to misery if a miracle preserved you alive.' After that I ceased to blaspheme, but I cursed my father. That is why I have uttered the words for which you blame me. That is why I have filled this whole assembly with horror. If I have committed an additional crime, punish me, but if you will allow that ever since the day of my birth my fate has been sad, bitter, and lamentable, then pity me." "But your mother?" asked the president. "My mother thought me dead. She is not guilty. I did not even wish to know her name, nor do I know it." Just then a piercing cry, ending in a sob, burst from the center of the crowd, who encircled the lady who had before fainted, and who now fell into a violent fit of hysterics. She was carried out of the hall, the thick veil which concealed her face dropped off, and Madame Danglars was recognized. Notwithstanding his shattered nerves, the ringing sensation in his ears, and the madness which turned his brain, Villefort rose as he perceived her. The proofs," said the president. "Remember, this tissue of horrors must be supported by the clearest proofs." "The proofs?" said Benedetto, laughing. "Do you want proofs?" "Yes." "Well then, look at M. de Villefort, and then ask me for proofs." Everyone turned towards the procureur, who, unable to bear the universal gaze now riveted on him alone, advanced staggering into the midst of the tribunal, with his hair disheveled and his face indented with the mark of his nails. The whole assembly uttered a long murmur of astonishment. "Father," said Benedetto, "I am asked for proofs. Do you wish me to give them?" "No, no, it is useless," stammered M.Z. de Villefort in a hoarse voice. "No, it is useless." "How useless?" cried the president. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I feel it impossible to struggle against this deadly weight which crushes me. Gentlemen, I know I am in the hands of an avenging God. We need no proofs. Everything relating to this young man is true." A dull, gloomy silence, like that which precedes some awful phenomenon of nature, pervaded the assembly, who shuddered in dismay. "What, Maître de Villefort?" cried the president. "Do you yield to an hallucination? What? Are you no longer in possession of your senses? This strange, unexpected, terrible accusation has disordered your reason. Come, recover." The procureur dropped his head. His teeth chattered like those of a man under a violent attack of fever, and yet he was deadly pale. "I am in possession of all my senses, sir," he said. "My body alone suffers, as you may suppose. I acknowledge myself guilty of all the young man has brought against me, and from this hour hold myself under the authority of the procureur, who will succeed me." And as he spoke these words with a hoarse, choking voice, he staggered towards the door, which was mechanically opened by a doorkeeper. The whole assembly were dumb with astonishment at the revelation and confession which had produced a catastrophe so different from that which had been expected during the last fortnight by the Parisian world. "Well," said Beauchamp, "let them now say that drama is unnatural." "Ma foi," said Château Renaud, "I would rather end my career like Monsieur de Morcerf. A pistol shot seems quite delightful compared with this catastrophe." "And moreover it kills," said Beauchamp. "And to think that I had an idea of marrying his daughter," said Debray. "She did well to die, poor girl." "The sitting is adjourned, gentlemen," said the president. "Fresh inquiries will be made, and the case will be tried next session by another magistrate." As for Andrea, who was calm and more interesting than ever, he left the hall, escorted by gendarmes, who involuntarily paid him some attention. "Well, what do you think of this, my fine fellow?" asked Debray of the sergeant-at-arms, slipping a louis into his hand. "There will be extenuating circumstances," he replied.